across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company on this Wednesday afternoon, whether you're sitting at home listening to this or whether you're one of the car dwellers on your way home during Talk Drive. There's lots to discuss. We're going to talk to Peter Bleksley in just a second about new knife crime laws. Could they make a difference? Well, a victim's sister has told Ian they can. Yvette Cooper thinks they can. What does Peter Bleksley think? And is there any chance whatsoever, I find it highly unlikely, that the Amazon boss Jeff Bezos would spend time in prison over knife sales to children? It's not necessarily about the availability of knives. Well, it is to some degree, but surely it's about what people are doing, and 70% or so of those crimes are being committed by people with kitchen knives. We will get to the bottom of that. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about what's going on in Ukraine. Quite a lot happening. Trump on his Truth Social page talking about Zelensky as a dictator without elections. Really, the economic and indeed diplomatic sands are shifting on that one. We'll talk about inflation, which is expected to jump to 3%, and net zero could mean higher bills. Surprise, surprise. I know I'm shocked by that one. Well, there are lots more things to talk about as well, including 3 million people claiming benefits with no obligation to seek work, and the delivery firm Every losing 22,000 packages a day. Well, I have been delivered to you, and I will be here between now and 7 o'clock. If you want to get in touch and make sure your voice is on the air, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. And remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a WhatsApp voice message, less than a minute please, or a text message via WhatsApp, or you can give me a ring for a discussion live on the air. That main number again, 0344 499 1000. Lots to discuss. Let's get started here on Talk. Well, there are new knife crime laws that are going to be enacted. Certainly, it looks as if Parliament will enact them and make them happen. And earlier today, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, set out what the new laws actually are.
We need stronger action to tackle this dangerous knife crime that is killing children, and we've seen lethal weapons in the hands of children, and we cannot go on with families being devastated in this way. And that is why we're introducing this major crackdown on online knife sales. It's Ronan's Law in memory of Ronan Kander, who was killed here in the West Midlands, because it's so important that we take action to protect our children.
Ronan's Law that the Home Secretary was talking about there, and that is after the 16-year-old Ronan Kander. He was murdered close to his home 3 years ago after being stabbed in the back and chest. It was a case of mistaken identity. His sister, Nikita Kander, spoke to Ian Collins a little bit earlier on Talk Today. This is what she said.
My brother, you know, as you would know, he was mistaken identity. He wasn't intended target of the attack. However, you know, 6 weeks before Ronan was murdered, the murderer went after his intended target, and you know, police were aware. Nothing was kind of done to ensure that murderer doesn't go on to do what he did. He used his mum's ID. He was ordering them in a period of 6 months, so he was actually harbouring loads of weapons into his home. Wow. And he was a self-admitted arms dealer. And on the day, he went to his local post office, didn't get ID, didn't get any checks, collected the weapon, went on later that day and took my brother's life. We are trying to do everything we possibly can to make it harder, to put in more barriers for the future, and to not allow weapons that are clearly just being designed to seriously harm and murder people to be allowed to be sold freely. And for those who are creating these weapons and for those who are profiting off them and advertising them, they need to be held to account.
That is Nikita Kander who is speaking there. Ronan Kander was her brother, the 16-year-old murdered close to his home 3 years ago after being stabbed in the back and the chest. That was a horrific case of mistaken identity. Will Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, solve this? Michelle has been in touch on WhatsApp messages already, says, what a farce. Online sales won't stop anything. Cooper is out of her depth and clueless. Well, Peter Blexley is a man who knows a thing or two about policing. He's a former Metropolitan Police detective. He's the host of Crime Suspects, which is made by this network. He's an author, a speaker, and of course had been a serving officer for many years. Peter, will this work?
Rest in peace, Ronan, 16-year-old boy. A little bit of backstory. Ronan was going to buy a games controller from another child, and he went to that child's house to buy it. A perfectly innocent sort of thing that a child would do to buy themselves a games controller.
Yeah.
The murderer mistook Ronan for being the seller of the games controller, and it was the seller of the games controller that the murderer wanted to kill.
Was the intended target.
Yeah, it was the intended target. So Ronan lost his life, tragically, and he was a wonderful boy. I've seen many, many testimonies to him. He was hoping to study law, had his whole life in front of him, and yet again, here we are, talking about a stolen child's life. Now, to answer your question, well, you can basically pass as much legislation as you like. You can make everything illegal. You can make breathing illegal. But, and I'm not being flippant, I'm using it as an example because if you don't have enough police who are sufficiently trained, motivated and capable, you can't enforce it. So will this just be another unenforceable piece of legislation? I hope not. It will go some way to holding online retailers to account, because it is just quite simply ridiculously easy to buy a murderous weapon online at the moment, and sentences will be increased for people who are then found in possession of a knife if they've got criminal intent. But of course, the police have got to prove that intent.
It's very interesting as well when we look at some of the details that of this case. His attacker, Ronan's attacker, who was also 16 at the time, used a 22-inch sword he had ordered online using his mother's ID pass to pass security checks. The jail term for selling weapons to under 18s is apparently going to increase from 6 months to 2 years, and a new policing unit backed with £1 million of funding to monitor for weapons being sold illegally on social media will be created. £1 million for a police unit. That's not going to pay for too many officers or too much of a fight back, really. £1 million?
Talk's cheap, but policing is expensive. £1 million won't scratch the surface of what I believe is needed. What we have to do is tackle the broader issue, and when I say we, I mean society, education, health, volunteer bodies, charities, everyone, to tackle this mindset as to why people, young people and adults as well, when they leave their house, their home, their flat, wherever it may be, they go, right, have I got my phone? Have I got my keys? Have I got any cash perhaps? Where's my knife?
Yeah.
Because too many people are taking knives out onto the streets. Only this week, weapons like the one used to murder Ronan were seized by patrolling police officers in my hometown of Bexleyheath. Enormous, great, murderous things with blades over 2 feet long that would simply skewer a human being were seized by police after people had run off. They were fortunately caught and charged. It's everywhere, this knife carrying, this weapons carrying, and until we tackle the mindset, we are not going to solve the problem.
It's interesting that the policing minister, Dame Diana Johnson, says nothing is off the table and it is absolutely disgraceful that retailers were selling knives to under 18s. I mean, I've been in many post offices, for example, you know, huge big packages people ask for, often for ID and so on. There are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of packages that go through many post offices every day. How realistic is it to say, well, actually, some of the retailers or those that are handing them out actually can check them? I just think that's probably unrealistic.
And in this world of shrinking numbers of post offices, whenever I go to my local one, which is not really local anymore, there's an enormous great queue.
Yeah, and they're asked to do more and more with less and less, really.
Exactly. And what are people who are waiting there, impatiently possibly, trying to return their parcels, post their cards, letters, whatever it may be, what are they going to feel about people endlessly being asked to provide ID and therefore slowing down the whole process.
They're not going to be able to scan them either. I mean, that's completely impractical.
It's going to be very, very challenging. And when the policing minister, Dame Diana Johnson, says, you know, nothing's off the table, I'll tell you what I'd really like to see, and this might make some people balk. I would like to see a greater number of armed police officers on the streets, and I would like to see them carrying out stop and search, and if need be, and responding to incidents. You know what would make many people think about carrying a knife twice? Is if a few, in appropriate circumstances where it was entirely lawful and necessary, a few very dangerous knife carriers got shot dead by the police. That might make people think again. It certainly did with armed robbery back in the 80s, when a lot of armed robbers got shot dead, and they of course morphed into drug dealing. But if we saw that in entirely appropriate circumstances where it was lawful and very necessary, I wonder if it would make people think again.
Bev in Hampshire has been in touch and says our grandson was attacked by two men, one with a knife. They threatened to use it. He wasn't stabbed, thankfully. They were caught by the police within 24 hours and went to prison. But after all the hard work of the police, the thugs were released early. They only served 12 months of their sentence on the instructions from Number 10, making space for people who said hurty words. There's no deterrent for knife crime. We need proper deterrence for it, says Bev. TAD, well, we'll get to the point that the TAD makes in just a second. The changes the government says will see increased prison sentences for selling weapons to under 18s for either individuals who have processed a sale or a company chief executive. We'll talk about Jeff Bezos in just a minute. Retailers being required to bring in stronger photo identity checks for buyers, both at points of sale and delivery. A new offence of possession with violent intent, which will come with a prison sentence of up to 4 years. This means that even if a weapon is legal, if there's intent to cause violence, it will be a crime, and a consultation on a registration and licensing scheme for online knife sellers.
But that intent has to be proven.
Yes. But then if you have one of these huge knives, I mean, what is your intent going to be? It's not going to be to chop up some onions.
But it has to be proven. Yeah. The onus is on the prosecution to prove that intent. So, OK, if somebody is seen running down the street with a 2-foot bladed machete, sword, knife or whatever above their head, and they're running after someone, then it's pretty obvious in those clear-cut circumstances that they've got an intent to use that to hurt somebody. But if somebody's stopped in the street and it's concealed down their tracksuit bottoms, where's the intent going to come from? You've got to prove it. And that person, you can pretty much guarantee, is not going to sit down in an interview room and say to the police, oh yes,
by the way,
I had every intention to stab somebody with it. Yeah. That ain't going to happen.
What do you make of this idea that the Amazon boss Jeff Bezos could face prison over knife sales to children? I just think that's ludicrous.
It's absolutely ludicrous. He's never going to be extradited from the US or where else he might be living in one of his multiple homes, enjoying his billions, because somebody, an Amazon employee, has recklessly, in breach of the UK law, sold a knife to an under 18. That is simply not going to happen. The legislation might say that it could happen, and there is perhaps an example whereby a CEO of a UK online retailer who was domiciled in the UK, lived in the UK, and recklessly, negligently didn't monitor their employees or just waves these kind of transactions through without doing the due diligence and the necessary checks, then that possibly could happen. But no, it's utter folly to suggest that Bezos would be extradited and brought to the UK.
Todd Davison's in Cambridge and says this talk about Jeff Bezos going to prison for selling knives is a nonsense. It's like prosecuting Henry Ford for making cars. This knife crime epidemic is down to a mindset nourished and engendered by social pressures, and until we change those, the crime rate will continue. Simon in Devon says the root cause of knife crime is the lack of deterrent. Kids are being bullied now, feel they have to take a knife to school for protection because that is how the bar has been set. 1 in 7 teachers claim to have seen a knife in school. We used to have fist fights at school. Now it is knives, says Simon. Rachel says, forgive me for being blunt, but why don't we just give a first offence of caught carrying a knife a mandatory 5-year minimum in prison? And the Mayor of London needs to pull his finger out or stand down. Let's talk to Robert in Coventry. Robert's given me a call on 0344 499 1000. Robert, you're very welcome to the programme. Peter Blexley can hear you as well. What would you like to say, Robert?
Yeah, what I like to say about the knife crime is that It's from the Royal Mail. They come through the Royal Mail or from other parcel forces people. Why ain't they scanned? And then you've got the name of the person who is going to get the knife.
Yes.
And then you give it to the police, and then the police can get it up on that.
Well, I'll just ask Peter that question. Just stay where you are, Robert. I'll come back to you in a second. Robert's just asking there about Royal Mail. Do they scan these packages that come through and so on? They must know what's in them, but it's not illegal to buy these knives, is it?
They're scanning the barcodes and, you know, the postage payment barcodes, because that's how they're making their money. But in terms of scanning the contents of the parcels, that's highly unlikely to happen, purely and simply because of the volume of it. But with regards to your previous contributors, they're hitting the nail on the head with the two main words. Mindset, which I've touched upon. We have to tackle that mindset. And then secondly, if the mindset cannot be persuaded to do the right thing, deterrent.
Yeah.
And where are the deterrents coming from? They're not. We know recent statistics have shown that people are not getting jailed for knife crime until they've committed a considerable number of offences.
Robert, do you feel the deterrents are there?
I do, really, just a little bit, but not a lot. I mean, years ago when I was at school, you used to get the police come to your school, you used to explain everything, and if you was in trouble, they used to put the old handcuffs on you and stuff like that, and tell you what was wrong and everything like that. And you used to go, oh, God, I ain't going to do that. I'll be handcuffed and I'll be put into a cell and everything.
Well, I'm just not sure there are enough police around anymore to have those kind of conversations with young people. Some of them, I'm sure, do go on. But listen, it's a big issue. We're going to continue to talk about it. Thanks, Robert in Coventry, and thank you to Peter Blexley, former Metropolitan Police Detective or crime commentator here on Talk. If you want to get your voice heard on this, or indeed on anything else we're talking about, Ukraine, Russia, whatever else, net zero, give me a call, 0344 499 1000. We'll talk to Isabel Oakeshott in just a second about all sorts of stories, including 3 million people claiming benefits with no obligation to seek work. We know that inflation is going to go up to 3%. The business secretary accused of fabricating his CV. And net zero, guess what? It's going to mean higher bills. Stay with us here on Talk.
People are listening to this who don't live in London, and they'll be thinking, oh, well, that's all very well for you. But at the very least, the cost of living is lower in other parts of the country that you don't feel like you can't feel TfL physically reaching into your wallet and taking your money out. And it might be TfL, but it might just be somebody doing that, because that's now a thing. Since when did that become a thing again?
My rental price has gone up, it's doubled in 4 years.
Unbelievable.
Doubled in 4 years.
Unbelievable.
And this is the thing, I know so many people moving out of London now, me included. I'm getting out.
Yeah.
I hate it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Donald Trump, when he opens his mouth or indeed taps his phone, things happen, the world moves, changes occur, and on Truth Social within the last little while he has said, a dictator without election. Zelensky better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues. Clearly, it's not quite shuttle diplomacy, it's more sort of asteroid diplomacy, going incredibly quickly in lots of different directions. Here to break it all down, to make sense of it, is Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor. Isabel, the latest broadside from Trump is not going to endear him to Zelensky, who previously he has, he's mentioned before that there haven't been elections there. There's been a war on, though, and indeed he's been criticised by Boris Johnson, who was at his inauguration.
Well, I'm very flattered that you think I can make sense of this. My goodness, I think we're all reeling from some of the language used. I mean, for Trump to come out and say millions have died unnecessarily is classic Trump hyperbole, isn't it? I'm not saying that there haven't been very, very large numbers of unnecessary deaths, but I don't think that it's quite in the millions yet. Essentially, what looks to be happening here, certainly this is how Zelensky will see it, is that Trump is kind of carving up a deal with President Putin, with Ukraine not part of the negotiation. I mean, it's an extraordinary situation. And why can he do that? Because Ukraine is so heavily dependent on, or has been so heavily dependent on the US to keep this effectively, to keep this war going, or to put it another way, to defend the sovereignty of their own borders. We are at an extraordinary moment now, which is going to divide the West, I think. You've got so many Western leaders who have really staked everything, their reputations, their country's money, on supporting Zelensky. And now Trump is essentially left Zelensky, is isolating Zelensky. So what do Western countries, and particularly what does Britain do about this? You know, Britain has stood full square behind Zelensky for all these years. Now basically Trump's saying, well, you know, Zelensky's done a terrible job and is essentially saying, let's get rid of him. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to carve up some kind of deal behind his back. It's a very, very uncharted waters here. And I'm afraid if that's not making sense of it, it's about the best that most of us can do.
It's interesting that Trump wrote Zelensky was a modestly successful comedian and accused him of having talked the US into a war that couldn't be won. We'll continue talking about that. In fact, Colonel Simon Diggins is coming up in a few minutes' time. But there's so many other things I want to talk to you and get your wisdom about, Isabel, this evening. Not least here in the UK, a possible jump to 3% of inflation. That is not going to do very well for our growth prospects, and especially what Labour wants to do with the economy.
Well, this is a shocker for Labour, because inflation is one of those things that, having been through such huge spikes in inflation under the Tory government, whilst it's an economic term, pretty much everyone in the country now understands what it means. It means your stuff is getting more expensive. And that is absolutely the last thing this Labour government wants coming as a result of its own economic decisions. And it's fascinating that one of the items in the kind of basket of goods by which the cost of living is judged is school fees, which is a bit strange. Many people will think, because most people aren't spending money on school fees, but nonetheless, technically, that has contributed, the VAT on school fees has contributed to that jump in inflation to 3%. It is exceptionally unwelcome news for the Chancellor. Last week, she had a slightly better bit of news. I mean, we're really going from a low base here with just not as disastrous growth figures as was perhaps expected.
0.1%. It's not nothing.
It seems like one week she gets something that's slightly less disastrous, and then next week she's plunged into another disaster. Bottom line, the economy is doing really, really badly, and this administration has staked its reputation on growth. They keep on saying it's at the heart of what they do and what they're doing. And without growth, we can't pay for things to get better, public services wise, and we don't have growth and people aren't feeling any better off. Now, Labour will say, well, they will point to a growth in wages, which I think is almost entirely down to the money they've been spraying around the public sector. Overall, though, business confidence is at rock bottom at this point.
One thing that does seem to have experienced some growth is the number of porky pies people have been telling about their CVs. We've seen the problems with Rachel Reeves over the last little while, saying that she spent the best part of a decade at the Bank of England. She said that a number of times. It was 5.5 years. I suppose in the court of law she might win. But the business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, now accused and indeed denies fabricating his CV, although he did say on a number of occasions that he was a solicitor. He never qualified as a solicitor.
Oh, which of us hasn't done this? I mean, Peter, did you spin up your CV? What is this?
I did a little bit on one occasion, but it was in a court of law I would win, because what happened, my first job back in the day was I was a researcher on Newsnight, and I worked on a film with Jeremy Paxman, the great Jeremy Paxman, about Northern Ireland. It won an award for cinematography, which had nothing to do with me. On my CV it was award-winning film.
I think that's justifiable, but not if you're entering top-level politics. At which point, I think you need to declare it.
I've never declared being a solicitor.
I think that. So I'm happy to say I'm sure that I have never spun up my CV. So this is one sin I've not committed. I may have lots of other ones, but not that one. I think we've got to a point now that if I were advising this Labour government on their communications, I would say, every one of you, look at your CVs, and you know, people's CVs change and evolve over time. Get all the versions out,
yes,
and please now come clean if you have exaggerated or fabricated anything. Now is the time. Let's have a truth and reckoning. Let's get it all out there, because a drip, drip, drip of Labour ministers exaggerating or falsifying their CVs is a terrible, terrible look. So let's just bring out your dead, guys. Let's see what
yes.
you've done. And then maybe we can all have a field day in the media for a few days, and that will be that. But
it'll all be over. And that is the first rule of PR, isn't it? Get everything out there. Just put it all out and make sure that people know what's there. Speaking about something else that might need a bit of truth and reckoning, Ed Miliband's thoughts on net zero. It's unsurprising. I don't know about you, Isabel. I was totally shocked with the admission that it could mean higher bills.
Well, I mean, it's not really complicated, this, because at the moment we've got renewables and we've also got backup, which is fossil fuels. And obviously, if you're going to do both of those things, it's more expensive than just doing one of them. Net zero is not going to make us any better off in terms of our energy prices for the foreseeable future. And Ed Miliband and the Chancellor have been under a great deal of pressure to explain precisely when this altar that we're all being sacrificed on is going to actually prove to be having been any worthwhile. And they never seem to be able to put any time frame on it. Why? Because they haven't got a clue. And if they do have a clue, it's in so much in the dim and distant future that much of the nation will expect that they themselves have been long forgotten as a government by the time this would come to any kind of positive, a net benefit for society. So I think they're really, increasingly, they are going to be in political trouble on net zero. It's taken a long while, I think, for voters to begin to see what a gigantic con much of this is and how many vested interests there are in continuing to peddle the net zero agenda. And people are just beginning to wake up to the fact that it doesn't make you a climate change denier or a dinosaur to question whether this is really the right response to changing weather.
Completely agree. Thank you very much indeed. That's Isabel Oakeshott there, our international editor. Thanks to this texter who says, in regard to knife sales, look at prisons as an example. Every possible measure is taken to stop weapons within them. However, people find a way to create weapons. Ultimately, this new policy will achieve nothing. The underlying problem is the people willing to use them and the culture surrounding it. Much of it will originate in immigration of violent and alien cultures. Let's hear a voice note now from Sam on these new knife crime laws. This is what Sam has to say.
The deterrent for knife crime isn't there, just like the deterrent for illegal immigration isn't there. And Peter's right, you've got to go to the root of the cause. Frankly, the police, they're just too soft. And quite often, it's not the officers, it's the pressure from above. The police used to have no fear or favour, and now they are politically driven. They won't admit it, but there's always some movement or ideology or fluffiness because they want their like box ticked.
Sam, I think there's a lot in that, and I really feel for a lot of the bobbies on the beat who are often trying to do the best job, but at the end of the day, it's a hierarchical organisation. They can use their judgment, but they're also following orders. They're following the law, which they should do, but there is so much dogma in policing as well, even though there are a lot of good men and women who work for that force. Let's hear another voice note now from Pete on the causes of knife crime.
I think gaming's got a lot to do and a lot to answer for with this knife crime, mate. And you gain like virtual pounds/dollars for stabbing people, for carrying weapons. Just my thoughts, mate. Cheers.
Pete, thanks for your thoughts on that. I think I agree, but also I remember, you know, there've been many times when there've been huge and horrible acts of violence. I remember when Jimmy Bulger was killed, there was such an outcry about a particularly violent film that his murderers had watched called Child's Play, and you know, these things did happen before. People were stabbed with knives before these kind of games happened. But I suppose, is it as bad? And actually, there's a lot to think about in that. It's a short message, but a lot to think about there. So thank you for that. Zoe in Lancashire says, afternoon, Peter, we need to cut foreign aid, all of it immediately, and use that money to keep our country safe in every aspect. This person says, it's not up to Trump and Putin to carve up Ukraine between them. Putin is the aggressor, having invaded Ukraine 3 times now and taken land. He shouldn't be allowed to get away with that. And Neil says, Cardi P, I thought Trump was the master negotiator, yet if what we read is true, then it looks as if he's being totally played by Putin. I had great hope for his presidency, but now I'm having serious doubts. Neil, I'm going to put that exact thought, actually, another very interesting thought, loads of really interesting thoughts today. I'm going to put that exact thought to Simon Diggins, Colonel Simon Diggins, former senior military officer. I'm going to put that exact thought from Neil. I'm going to read it out to him again after the break and see what he thinks of that. I just wonder what really is going on here. Colonel Simon Diggins in just a second. Your thoughts too. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots to discuss today, including what President Trump has said. This was a pretty extraordinary press statement from the President of the United States. He appeared to blame Ukraine for starting the war. This is what he said.
And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad.
Well, Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of this country, has responded to that. He says these comments, as he puts it, Boris Johnson puts it, the comments are not intended to be historically accurate, but to shock Europeans into action. Mr. Johnson said, of course Ukraine didn't start the war. You may as well say that America attacked Japan at Pearl Harbor. Very interesting thoughts on that. Also, in regard to President Zelensky, he hasn't held an election since the start of the war 3 years ago. We remember, of course, here in the United Kingdom when we were at war, and well, there was an election in 1935, then there wasn't another one until 1945. There was, of course, a government of national unity in the middle of that, where Attlee joined Churchill and various others. But I suppose the point is what Trump is saying about Zelensky, indicating his belief that Zelensky should hold an election in Ukraine now.
We're hearing that Russia wants to force Ukraine to hold new elections in order to sign any kind of a peace deal. Is that something that the U.S. would ever support?
Well, we have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, or essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating, and where a country has been blown to smithereens. You got most of the cities are laying on their sides. The buildings are collapsed. It looks like a massive demolition site. So, you know, people are tired of it.
Well, that's another series of very interesting and perhaps not entirely accurate claims there. The legitimacy point is an interesting one. It's one that Putin has brought up. And Zelensky's own position is very, very interesting because the level of support that he has will be an interesting one to actually probe. It's hard to when a lot of Ukraine is in a warlike situation. It's at 57%, apparently, according to one poll. So not 4%, but 57%, which, you know, many politicians would love to have a 57% approval rating. And on Truth Social as well, Donald Trump wrote, "A dictator without elections, Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do." I'm not sure all. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues. I'm not sure it's possible to make sense of this, but if there's one man who can, it's Colonel Simon Diggins, who's a military and defence analyst, former defence attaché in Kabul. He knows of what he speaks. Simon, what do you make of this? I mean, what is going on here? We have a really interesting message that I promised to read out again from Neil, who says, Cardi P, I thought Trump was the master negotiator, yet if what we read is true, then it looks as if he is being totally played by Putin. I had great hopes for his presidency, but now I'm having serious doubts. What do you think, Simon?
Peter, good afternoon to you. I think it's quite an extraordinary series of statements from President Trump. It does point to one of the weaknesses of President Trump's way of governing, which was also apparent in his first presidency, which is the quality of the advisors he has around him. If there are people around him who say the truth to him, and he doesn't like the sound of that truth, he gets rid of them. And we saw that with John Bolton, for example, who, you know, was a very, you know, a soulmate in terms of kind of right-wing politics, but he got rid of him from there. I think Boris Johnson's done exactly the right thing and point out where these statements are completely inaccurate. There's no question who the aggressor is. It is Putin. It's Putin who started this war, and Ukraine has been on the defensive ever since. So I think it's distinctly unhelpful of the president to say that. I think basically his nose has been put out of joint because he thought he could carve this whole thing up as a deal between himself and Putin, and then very reasonably President Zelensky speaking for Ukraine, the European leaders have actually said, do you know what? There's more than one dog in this particular fight, and you need to bring us with us and talk to people. And particularly the country who we're most concerned about is Ukraine. They need to know that they're going to get a strong, say, an independent country afterwards. And nothing you're saying so far indicates that. Rather, you seem to be giving away the crown jewels, which is in terms of territories which Ukraine might end up losing, and also the issue around the NATO membership. Though I personally think, and I've said to you before, I think the NATO membership is less important than a strong and secure Ukraine with its own strategic non-nuclear deterrent that will actually deter Russia.
Speaking about NATO, how united is NATO at the moment? You have Germany saying, you know, these kind of Olaf Scholz, their chancellor, saying any conversation about the future of Ukraine far too premature. You have Keir Starmer saying that he wants to be a bridge between America and Western European countries. You have America saying different things that sound fairly similar to what Russia's saying. You have obviously Russia's not a NATO country, and neither is Ukraine. That's part of the point of all of this. I mean, NATO in itself and Europe, Western Europe, is not speaking with one voice either.
No, they're not. And I think one of the challenges, again, you go back to the first presidency of Trump, where he challenged the European leaders then around their defence spending. I think the problem is he's effectively found them wanting. And even though there's been some changes since then, he's still finding them wanting in terms of their support. So they don't have a kind of good place in President Putin's view of the world. Add to that, you've got people like Viktor Orban in Hungary, and even to some extent Turkey, who have occasionally shown themselves to be fairly semi-detached. In Hungary's case, occasionally even pro-Putin. So NATO is not as strong as it was. It expanded eastward at the request of those countries because they were scared of what the future should be. But that brought with it a whole series of problems, which I think in many respects we ignored. And now in a position where fundamentally those weaknesses from that structural expansion are now coming to the fore. And I think that one of the challenges we've got is how do we ensure the security of those countries who are now under threat, direct threat from Russia. And it's not straightforward how we do that.
What happens now in regard to the negotiations? What do we know about next steps, Simon?
We don't know a huge amount at the moment. We kind of know the positions of the various sides. But until we can get a clear sense of what Ukraine's position is going to be and where that sits, I think it's going to be difficult to do. Everyone's trying to put all the things in place in advance of that. But fundamentally, for example, how's the process going to be? Is there going to be a ceasefire? There's a conversation: will there be a ceasefire by the end of this month? Followed then by some negotiations. And what are the nature of those negotiations? Now, it's not unreasonable that some of this stuff is not fully out in the open. But when you're talking about something as fundamental as kind of peace and war, we have to have some understanding, particularly for Western Europe, if the intention is that they supply troops, support, and reassurance to the Ukrainian people. And so at some point, somebody's going to be fairly clear on that. But the first thing probably is a ceasefire. Ceasefire in place, stop the killing, stop people killing each other. And then something that might be like a rational dialogue might follow on. But that might take a number of months. And here again, we come up against the challenge we've got with Trump, is that he's very impatient. He doesn't like things that take a bit of time. He expects to be able to do something instantly and then move on. And this is going to be a real problem as we move forwards.
I was involved in some international negotiations in regard to Northern Ireland when I was a special advisor. And the one thing I know about negotiations, which are not nearly as important as this, I'm not saying that for a second. The one thing I know about negotiations is that when you go into what they call the tunnel, where basically no one outside the negotiation knows what's happening, and then you come out the other end, it's actually, despite my journalistic instinct of wanting to know everything and, transparency and sunlight being the best disinfectant, sometimes it is a good idea to have some form of secrecy to negotiations. Do you think any of that is going to happen over the next little while, given how freely Trump speaks about things?
I think that's one of the challenges. I mean, I actually think that people like Marco Rubio, for example, who's the Secretary of State in America, who's actually highly regarded on both sides of the House, but he was the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and was well regarded by Democrats as well as by Republicans. I think people like that actually understand it. I think J.D. Vance understands it, and people like that. So there are people around him who actually understand the importance of doing that. But the challenge is actually, do they have President Trump's ear, or is it listening to people who frankly don't understand exactly what you've described? There is a point when you need to have some secrecy, whatever. So the challenge is going to be that we may well have very competent and very honest negotiators working on behalf of Ukraine and if you like, the Western position there. But if you've got noises off the whole time coming from the president, I think we've got a problem on our hands.
There's some strong words from Trump we're discussing today, but also very strong words from Zelensky. He says Donald Trump is, as he puts it, living in a disinformation space created by Russia. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, he's certainly giving that impression, isn't he? I mean, and he's echoing what President Putin has been saying to him before. I think Trump's got this view of the world, which is that he is some kind of sort of Superman, and he can divide the world up between him and the other sort of Superman. And we've had that before. You can go back to the sort of Hitler-Ribbentrop Pact. You can go back even to the Napoleonic period when you had Napoleon and Alexander, the Tsar of Russia, dividing the world up. And the idea, particularly on the Russian side, the idea of kind of spheres of influence is very much a kind of very strong theme throughout their understanding of the world and foreign affairs. They've got this view, and it's a sort of old geopolitical realist view of the world, but they have this view of spheres of influence, and it seemed on the surface to be very logical, and perhaps it was in the 19th century when there were just a number of great powers. But now we live in a much more complex, multipolar world. And that idea of great powers and the leaders of the great powers talking to each other and everybody else just following underneath it does not make sense. The one thing that would make sense is for Europe to show itself to be strong in itself. And that, of course, is the great weakness of our position. Because we're weak on defence, because we're disunited in the EU, and even in the kind of the defence powers, then it's very easy for us to be ignored. And so regardless of how these things work out, one thing that Europe has got to do is get its act together in terms of defence and security, and actually look and behave like a world power player. It should do. It's got the money, it's got the people, but at the moment it doesn't. And that means that we just get ignored and overruled by people like Putin and people like, worse still, by people like Trump.
Simon, thank you. That's Colonel Simon Diggins. He's a former senior military officer, defence analyst, of course. Thank you to him. Derek says, Starmer and the UK must side with Trump and the USA or we're in deep trouble. Thank God Trump is speaking to Putin. If he was Starmer, he'd give away Scotland to Russia and Wales to Gaza, says Simon in Clare. Where is Clare? I'm interested with that. There's a place called Clare in Northern Ireland. It's a very small place. Actually, it's got a very beautiful glen. I wonder if that is the same place. I wonder. I expect it probably isn't. Joanna in Salisbury says, hi, Cardi P. Putin should not be able to gain from his aggression. If he wants a piece of land, then he gives into Ukraine being part of NATO, or he gives all he has taken this time and last time plus reparations if he doesn't want Ukraine as part of NATO. I can believe Trump has ruled over to have his tummy tickled. Now there's an image. I agree that video games are having a huge effect on our youngsters, says one person on text. Jeff Bezos to go to jail, says Andrew. What rubbish. Maybe we can send Cooper to jail for failing to control our borders and putting the public at risk. That's Andy and Thatcham there. Peter, Paul and Wolves here. I've been involved in the parcel industry for years. We would never know what is in every parcel, the same way drugs are moved. Great show. I mean, if you're moving parcels, if you're involved in the parcel industry, how on earth are you going to know what's in those parcels? Peter says, what a pitiful sight at the Munich Security Conference. 2 leaders on their way out, desperate for recognition. And Mr. Orban, I should say, in Hungary, who is one of the finest leaders in the West, hated by the establishment. Take note when he speaks, says Peter. I'm not such a huge fan of him, I must say. Grant says, where are the UN in all of this? Would they not be best to provide the peacekeepers? That's Grant in Bradford there. We'll take a load of your calls and your texts and voice messages and all the rest of it in just a minute here on Talk.
get found out with these.
Well, you do.
And I think part of the problem is we know that Labour are full of people who've only ever really been involved in politics or local government.
Yes.
You know, how many of the people at the top of government have actually run a business? Certainly the business secretary hasn't. And I suppose one of the way perhaps they differentiate themselves from each other when they're trying to go up the ladder in the first place from each other, sort of saying that they've got something different than political experience, is to say something like they were a solicitor.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who has been in touch, including Simon, who says Clare is apparently in Suffolk. So thank you for that. There's also another one in County Armagh, near a place called Tandragee. It is a lovely little glen that I love walking in when I'm at home in Northern Ireland. It makes me happy. And another thing that would make me happy would be winning a lot of money. But sadly, I can't enter this competition. But you can now find out how you could be in with a chance of winning £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Well, there are all the details, and thank you to Colin, who's been in touch. He says, even though the United States have far superior firepower compared to Russia, I think Trump is frightened into getting into conflict with them, as he truly believes in the threat by Putin, like various missiles. Well, let's talk to Christine, who is in Surrey. Christine, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hello, Peter. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm very well. It's good to talk to you again. What do you make of all this, Christine?
Oh, Peter, I'm going to try and keep the emotion out of my voice, but I am so utterly dismayed because I was willing to put my doubts to one side with Trump getting back in. But truly, he reminds me now of the Joker from The Dark Knight. He is literally verbatim repeating Putin's rhetoric. How can any country that's at war hold an election when millions have been displaced? Over 20% of their country has been illegally occupied by Russia. Hundreds of thousands have been murdered. Nobody is talking about the stolen Ukrainian children. And let's not forget that Elon Musk has been in contact with Putin, and he was switching his Starlink satellites on and off to aid Putin over the last 3 years and denying Ukraine the same. You had Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, deliberately delaying agreed funds to Ukraine when Ukraine was on the offensive for 8 vital months. And you've also got, look at Belarus, Georgia and Hungary. You know, they're all Putin puppets. And at the end of the day, there cannot be peace without justice. I mean, peace without justice is no peace.
Do you think we should negotiate at all? Do you think there should be any negotiation with Putin?
Well, obviously, any conflict has to end in negotiation, but not when the aggrieved party is excluded from it. And now you've got Trump accusing Vladimir Putin, President Zelensky, of being a dictator. I mean, the irony, he was elected and it's internationally recognized he's the genuine president of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin doesn't have that international recognition. But I'll tell you what, Peter, I think the West have been so utterly cowardly in how they've dealt with Ukraine. They've delayed, they've talked, they've crossed the dotted the I's, they've crossed.
We've given them a lot of money, Christine, here in the UK. We've given them a lot of weapons, and surely we've helped them.
I'm not denying that at all, but we have delayed too much. When they were on the offensive, we should have given them everything they needed. What was it that Zelensky said at the very beginning, when President Biden offered him a flight out of there? He said, "I don't want a plane. I want weapons." I can't remember now what he said.
Yes, he said, "Don't give me." Yeah, he wanted a particular type of weapons, and so when he said that, I think in Parliament Hall or at Westminster Hall, when he made that, he made those comments a number of times. Christine, what do you think should happen now, and what do you think what, if any, do you think the UK's role should be in this, Christine?
Well, I think if it is possible, and I don't know if it is, for goodness sake, can Europe just unite for once?
Yeah. Well, they're very disunited. Olaf Scholz saying one thing, Starmer saying another, the French in a different position as well.
Oh, they're all out for their own self-interest instead of seeing this for what it is in another 10, 20 years' time. Trump won't care because he won't be around. The guy is, they say he's a great negotiator. I actually think he's acting like an extortionist. Well, I'm not impressed by him at all.
Very, very interesting thoughts there, Christine, impassioned thoughts from Christine in Surrey. Let's hear some more thoughts from Martin. He sent me a voice note on Ukraine.
What I fail to understand is Europe, together, united, has 4 times the armed forces of the Russians. Not only 4 times the size of the Russian military, but technologically more advanced. And additionally, we can actually put more troops on the ground, what the Americans can, but it has to be united Europe. Our biggest failing is we are not united, or certainly we get the impression we're not united. I just don't understand why common sense doesn't apply here. You've got these fantastic European nations that are well capable of competing with America, Russia and China on every level, yet we're so divided.
We are incredibly divided, there's no doubt about that. There is no unanimity, as we were just saying to Christine there, Martin, so many different views on this in Germany and France and elsewhere. There are lots of different views, and Keir Starmer somewhere in the middle of all of that. Let me know your views on all of this. 0344 499 1000. We'll get the thoughts of Tim Montgomery, who's a former number 10 advisor. He'll be here in the studio on this story and a number of others in just a few minutes' time. We'll take some more calls, texts and tweets as well in the next hour and talk about parcels going missing. And Alicia Fitzgerald will be here. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, good evening. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Lovely to have your company, whether you're at home, whether you're on the move, whether you're one of the car dwellers making your way home. Although it is, of course, half term, and I'm filling in all this week for Jeremy Kyle, who will be back on Monday. Loads to talk about, including knife crime, benefits claimants with no obligation to seek work. Would you pay £121 to meet Boris Johnson? Zelensky saying Trump is living in the disinformation space. Inflation up to 3%. Net zero bills are going to cost us all. And we'll talk to Tim Montgomery and Alyssa Fitzgerald, two of the finest political minds, about that. Delivery firm Every losing 22,000 packages a day as well. Are you a victim of that? Also, Emma Raducanu, very interesting story about her being very perturbed by a member of the audience, or a member of the crowd anyway, when she was playing a tennis match. We'll talk about that as well. We'll take your calls, texts and tweets. You can give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Lots to talk about this Wednesday tea time. You can text me at 72222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can text me, as I say. You can give me a WhatsApp text message on that main number. You can also send me a WhatsApp voice message on that main number, or give me a ring for a discussion live on the air here at Talk, 0344 499 1000. Lots to discuss. Stay with me here on Talk. Well, let's kick off the 5 o'clock hour with Tim Montgomery, the former number 10 advisor. He's defected from the Conservatives to Reform, still speaking in an awful lot of sense. Tim, great to talk to you. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you for the plug. Not everyone will agree. I talk a lot of sense, so I'll give you a fiver when I see you.
Excellent. That sounds good, or perhaps just a double-decker. Tell me your thoughts. Firstly, there's loads I want to talk to you about, but the first thing I want to talk to you about is actually your old boss, Boris Johnson, who is apparently offering fans the opportunity to shake his hand and get a photo opportunity, but £121 is the cost. What do you make of that?
Well, seems a little bit odd to me, because he must be earning an absolute fortune, mega bucks from the speaker circuit in America, from his book, from lucrative corporate affairs events. So why would he charge fans, people who he probably still wants to connect with, if he does want to, re-emerge as Conservative leader, which I think is something I would be surprised if he does want. Why would he want to charge, ordinary fans £121? I'd like to see the detail of the story, Peter, I think, before commenting properly.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There are a lot of these celebrities or famous people a lot of people want to get close to, and they often can monetize that. I know those people in things like Marvel, the Marvel series and so on, and anybody who's ever been associated with Star Wars can make an absolute fortune. It's interesting in regard to Boris Johnson, actually, because on a much more serious story, he's been attacking Donald Trump over claims Ukraine started the war with Putin. He said, of course Ukraine didn't start the war. You might as well say America attacked Japan at Pearl Harbor. I just wonder if we could actually look at this clip of Trump, who has been saying at a White House press conference that has been saying that we've been talking about Zelensky, and saying, of course, that there are all sorts of problems in regard to Ukraine. Let's have a look at what President Trump has been saying.
And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. He was so bad.
Also, he talked about the legitimacy, which is something that President Putin has talked about in regard to Zelensky personally.
We're hearing that Russia wants to force Ukraine to hold new elections in order to sign any kind of a peace deal. Is that something that the U.S. would ever support?
Well, we have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating, and where a country has been blown to smithereens. You got most of the cities are laying on their sides. The buildings are collapsed. It looks like a massive demolition site. So, you know, people are tired of it.
That's President Trump speaking in the last few hours. It's interesting, Tim, we have a lot of people on this station, a lot of people who watch and listen to this station who are big supporters of Donald Trump. But it seems to me, and this is not a scientific, but it seems to me that people certainly don't seem to be, today anyway, supporting him on this one. I'll just read you one message here from this person who says, Cardi P, if Trump really throws Ukraine under the bus, I think as Europeans, we need to respond in a serious way. We're continually told that Donald is a businessman, so let's hit him where it hurts in the pocket. Let's boycott US goods. I'm sorry, I'm very angry about this. What's your take on all of this, Tim?
Yeah, well, I'm probably one of those people, Peter, who has been sympathetic to Donald Trump in a number of particular policies that he's pursued, particularly on the US domestic front. But I can't defend this in any way at all. He's actually spouting Putin's propaganda points. It's Putin that says, you know, that Zelensky doesn't have any authority. And if we're worried about the authority of politicians, democratic authority, we all know that Putin has no authority whatsoever. How many people fall off verandas in Russia, you know, when they dare say something negative about Putin? How many opponents of Putin have been killed, have been extradited, have been imprisoned? If anyone has illegitimacy, it is Putin. And for Donald Trump, supposedly leader of the free world, to be sort of repeating these points that come directly from the Kremlin, well, I'm ashamed really of any support I've given to Trump, unless he sort of starts to backtrack on this very soon.
Well, Zelensky himself has said Donald Trump is, as he puts it, living in a disinformation space created by Russia. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I don't know what the explanation is. And of course, there'll be some people who think that there's financial interest behind what Donald Trump is doing. Does he have some sort of financial relationship with Russia? I've always been someone who's poo-pooed that sort of suggestion. But the way he's behaving at the moment, cuddling up to the country that invaded Ukraine, making as though that Ukraine is the problem, it was Ukraine's fault rather than Russia's. Well, I'm afraid I'm beginning to become very suspicious as to why Donald Trump is behaving like this.
Let's talk about a few other stories that are around today politically. We're looking at an expected jump to 3% with inflation. We know that the price of energy bills is going up anyway, but also Ed Miliband's officials announcing that net zero will mean higher bills. So there doesn't seem to be any lack of misery for people whose bills are going up.
Peter, I interrupt you. That must be a mistake, surely, what you just said, because before the election, Labour promised to cut energy bills.
So hold on a second, Tim. Hold on a second, Tim. Are you suggesting that a politician might say something that wasn't true in order to get elected? Because that's a very strong allegation.
Goodness gracious me. Well, Peter, we really are breaking news this afternoon.
Yes, indeed. What do you make of it, Tim?
Well, look, there's two big prices that government can control. One is taxes, and we've seen taxes rise again, despite what Labour promised before the last election. And the other one, of course, is energy prices. We've just been talking about the invasion of Ukraine. That invasion sent a lot of our energy prices skyrocketing. And what we don't need is an Ed Miliband, ill-thought-out green agenda, which even adds further to those bills. And it would be okay if we were sure that this action that Britain was taking was reducing climate change. But as we know, India, China, and much of the rest of the world are still polluting, probably polluting more than ever. So all we're doing is we're crippling British business. British business has the highest energy prices of any manufacturing sector in the developed world, which means that we can't produce the manufacturing goods that we need to be a competitive economy. And of course, then there are the pensioners. It's a very cold day here in Salisbury. I don't know what it's like in London, Peter.
Nippy enough, it must be said.
Pensioners, of course, have had to survive a very difficult winter without their winter fuel allowance.
Tell me about your thoughts as well about what Liz Kendall, the Work and Pensions Secretary, she's been talking about a number of different aspects of this, including the fact that there are many, many people, millions of people, 3 million people, who are claiming benefits with no obligation to seek work. She wants to change that, can she?
Well, I don't know whether she can, but she really does have my best of sort of luck and best wishes if she can make this happen. And if anyone is interested in looking at the scale of the problem that Britain now faces, Peter, I recommend that they go to the Channel 4 website and look at a recent documentary that Fraser Nelson produced. The fact is that now we have more people on sickness benefits in Britain than we've ever had in our history. It soared after the pandemic. And I think I'm right in saying we will soon be at a point where we're spending more on sickness benefits than we are on national defence. So unless we get this bill down, then we really will have no chance of beginning to be the kind of Europe that can defend Ukraine. And it's all right for Rachel Reeves to put further taxes on British business, but until actually we've got the house in order and are not spending money wastefully, as we are on welfare, we shouldn't be raising taxes at all.
Tim, thank you. That's Tim Montgomery there, former number 10 advisor. Thanks to John, who's been in touch. He says, I love people saying Trump is a puppet of Putin. Does that make the UK and Europe puppets of Zelensky? Personally, I think Trump is 100% correct. I no longer wish my tax money to be used to fund a proxy with Russia, says John. Paul says this must be worrying for the Americans. How many states would Trump give away instead of fighting for them? Don in Chelmsford. Hi, Peter. Naturally, Trump is attracting criticism over his efforts to end the Russia-Ukraine war. The main issue is to stop the killing. People should calm down and let the process run its course. Stephen Bromsgrove says, how many European dead and wounded young people do you think it would take to defeat, in inverted commas, Putin? What is an acceptable number by country or by class, says Steve. Very, very interesting. Ali says, let's call America's bluff and kick them out of every country. They have bases in Europe and see how America can get round the world and become the police of the world without any of their bases, says Ali. Ali, an interesting thought. I don't think it's going to happen somehow. Rob in Dublin says, great to have Irish listeners. Great to hear from you, Rob. Rob says, calling Zelensky a dictator while cozying up to the biggest one in the world. Don't say we didn't know this was going to happen with Trump. P.S. Love the show, Peter. Thank you, Rob. Much appreciated. Matthew is in Newport and has given me a ring in 0344 499 1000. Matthew, I know you've been waiting a little while. Thank you for your patience. What would you like to say?
That's no worries, Peter. Thank you. I might call myself a professional whinger, as Kev O'Sullivan referred to me as, but there we go. We'll move on.
I think I might be a professional whinger too, actually.
Well, I think Kevin is by nature a professional. There we go.
If anyone made it a profession, it was Kevin O'Sullivan.
Yes, and he does it very well.
Yes, he does.
No, I'm just saying that initially when Trump came out with these comments, people were saying, did he mean it? Was it a mistake? Was it a misspeak? And frankly, if Biden would have said this, we would have been going, Sleepy Joe, he don't even know who started the war. And I just think that they overall sort of bias towards Trump being this, what I think he wants to be, because of his ego. He wants to be the saviour and, he's going to end this. When I think it's financial, he just doesn't want the problem in his country of having to fund for this. And he's right about NATO. They plough so much more into it. That's why I think there is actually a call for a European army against other people's things, because the interoperability, the amount of European countries that are embedded into this country's defences, companies. And I just think that this way he's made Zelensky out to be the bad guy and Putin sort of ready for peace when, Putin isn't elected. Putin kills people abroad. Putin gets people shoved out of buildings and helicopters.
Well, he does all poisons people in this country. There were two things that Trump said today that are demonstrably untrue. They are factually wrong that he said today. I'm not criticising him. I'm simply saying these were factually wrong when he said that Zelensky has a 4% approval rating. He doesn't. He has a 57% approval rating. He also said Ukraine started the war. Ukraine didn't start the war. It was Russia. I wonder, I mean, some people like Trump for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons they like him is that he's unfiltered. He says what comes into his head. I'm sure every single word I've said today, maybe even on this show, and every single word you've said, Matthew, may not be 100% accurate. He is the President of the United States. People seem to like this unfiltered aspect of it, the fact that it's not polished, the fact that he does occasionally make mistakes. But does it matter, Matthew?
Yes, I mean, you said the word. He is the President of the United States. He is basically the keeper of the free world when it comes to the strength of the army. And he talks nonsense. And people who may not know to go look at and find the facts might say, yeah, I heard that. 4%, cool, he should be. And I think it's a narrative being built up that some sources on the internet, I'm not going to say the far right, I'm going to say all of them do it, but there's something to undermine what's going on here. And Europe has to realise, and America does, because America's very close to the European countries that are in the way for defensive regions. They keep them sweet. But we all work together, and frankly, I think Putin's just doing a waiting game. He's going to wait until Trump does his 4 years, and then he can do what he wants. Because I don't think he trusts Trump either. I mean, Trump is a loose cannon. And I just think Putin's thinking, right, 4 years' time, there'll be somebody in there, everything's changed, they won't want to put money in, I'll go off again. And let's not forget, World War II started by us by going into Czechoslovakia, and we had a pact with them, and we did nothing. And it was only when he ended up going into Poland that we did something, and it was all too late then. And even then, the Americans could have come in and crushed them. But what I'm saying is, we're not learning by history, and we cannot make the Ukrainians out to be the bad guys, no matter how corrupt they were.
There is a lot of corruption in Ukraine.
Yeah, but they were trying to improve, weren't they? They were trying to get to a sort of a European attitude. Just remember, in Russia, you get put away for talking against the government. You can do what you want over it. We've got a station like this. You've never had a station like that in Russia.
No, very, very, very true, Matthew, or even anything vaguely approaching it. Really interesting thoughts there, Matthew. Thanks very much. Sorry, do you have a final thought there? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you didn't, and thank you for giving me the time to talk.
No worries. Listen,
rabbit on.
Not at all, Matthew. Great to talk to you. Brian says, I think a deal has already been done between Putin and Trump. Rachel says, Cardi P, just playing devil's advocate here, but maybe Trump is playing Putin, and this is all strategy. If he truly is throwing Zelensky under the bus, he will lose my support. Well, yeah, is this just throwing things against a wall, or is it a game of five-dimensional chess? We don't understand. I'm not sure I know the answer to that or can decode it. Alison says, hi Peter, I have never felt so adversely affected by government in my whole 30 years of being able to vote. My first vote in 1997 was for Labour because my dad and family were affected by the Tories closing the pits. Yet I have more admiration for Thatcher than I ever would for Starmer. Needless to say, I never voted Labour again. After joining the Navy, I've never felt so politically homeless. Well, Alison, if you are politically homeless, you've come to the right place, because an awful lot of people are politically homeless. I used to be a member of a political party. I'm no longer a member of the Conservatives. I couldn't imagine myself being a member of them anytime soon, or indeed any other political party. I feel politically homeless, and you know, you may be homeless politically, but this is the place to come for a very warm welcome. It's Talk, and we're going to talk through a number of political stories with Alicia Fitzgerald, political correspondent, next here on Talk. Stay with us.
breaking news this morning revealed that under the Terrorist Act, 242 people were arrested in the year to June of this year.
Something you can indulge in as to all the people who aren't going to prison because, well, there's no prison spaces.
So this is a Talk exclusive we've been looking at.
I said, you take these cuffs off me and speak to me like a human being rather than a common criminal.
You're just left wondering, do these people who lead us actually hate Britain? Yeah. Do they not love our country and everything that we've stood for?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now then, meet and greets are something that big celebrities do. They often charge their fans to go and see them and meet them. And in fact, there was a big celebrity recently. Who was it? Was it Tom Cruise or someone? I can't remember. Who said that you weren't allowed to physically touch them if you're on a meet and greet. You could do the meet and greet. You could stand beside this person and you weren't allowed to physically touch them. But apparently, if you do want to shake hands and have a handshake and photo op with Boris Johnson, it's £121. I wonder how much it would be for Alicia Fitzgerald for a meet and greet. Alicia, how much would you charge?
Make it 122, just so there's a little bit of rivalry.
Round it up there.
Yeah.
Round it up there, yeah.
Everyone's two favourite blondes.
Alicia Fitzgerald is political correspondent and is with us. Tell us about Boris on this. Where's it happening? Where can we go? Hurry up and take my money.
Joe, I actually don't know where the location of this is, and I really should.
Maybe you should have found out before coming on here this afternoon.
But I do know that he's charging a hefty sum for this big meet and greet. I think it said that you can spend the evening with him, which I think kind of sounded a little bit dubious.
Would you like to spend the evening with Boris Johnson?
Are you asking me or asking the listeners?
I suppose it's more a rhetorical question, really.
Yeah.
I'm going to see if I can find out where. I can see if I can do your work for you and find out where this, where you can actually have this meet and greet. Where is this meet and greet actually happening?
Well, wherever it is, if you want to pay a hefty 121 quid, I think is really steep for a meet and greet. No?
Oh well, I don't know. I mean, I tell you what, I did one of those. You know Boise from, you won't because you're too young, so Only Fools and Horses, there's a character in it called Boise. You know who that is. And my dad really likes him, and I got him to do one of those little videos for my dad's birthday. It was 30 quid. And it was actually really good. It was like a really nice thing. My dad really liked it. It was funny. He said specific things about like my dad's football club and stuff. And listen, if you want to pay 121 quid meeting Boris Johnson, well, maybe that's not a lot of money to people who, if he's their hero.
Well, all I can say is that everyone's going to be really jealous that we've had the pleasure for free.
Yes, indeed.
We didn't have to pay.
I have had the pleasure of meeting. Well, Boris Johnson has had the pleasure of meeting me.
Exactly.
And no money changed hands. It must be said. Right then, would you pay £121 to meet Boris Johnson, or indeed how much money would you spend to meet your heroes necessarily? Would you fly right round the world to, if they happen to be in Uruguay or something, would you go and fly there? There's lots of other arguably more important political news around, including inflation expected to jump to 3%, Alicia?
Yeah, I mean, not the best news at the moment, especially, well, for everybody, but particularly not for the government and for Rachel Reeves. We've had a string of really difficult stories relating to the economy about things just getting worse and worse. So this is definitely going to be an added one to that very big load on Rachel Reeves' desk. I think the other issue is that the Bank of England obviously recently just lowered their interest rates. They just agreed to drop them, and clearly a policy that is used to control inflation is increasing interest rates, and now that's going to be slightly thrown into question if inflation is still going up. And now the big question clearly is, what can you do? What will the government do about this? And what actually options are there to make sure inflation stops going up?
And there's this worry about stagflation as well, where you have a stagnant economy, inflation going up, interest rates very difficult. Just tricky political and more importantly economic times for so many people.
Yeah, because a big part of government policy and what they can do to try and control inflation is, sadly, no one wants to hear it, put up taxes, things like that, reduce public spending, all of which at the moment are going to go down really, really badly in terms of public perception.
And it's only about 6 weeks to go until a lot of those tax rises, especially with national insurance, for example, that were announced in the budget, actually come in. So very, very tricky times for Rachel Reeves. Rachel Reeves, of course, someone who has been criticised an awful lot about her CV. And now we see that one of her colleagues, the business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, as well. Take us through this.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite fantastic. I have to admit, I did laugh at this a bit. Jonathan Reynolds basically claimed that he was a solicitor when actually he was a trainee solicitor and never actually finished.
It's not the same thing.
The course, which is just, I mean, I don't know how you can kind of write that and
mix
keep
that
that
up.
on your. Yeah, I mean, it's quite an extreme thing to make up. I'll put my hands up. I've lied on my CV.
You've
before.
lied on your CV?
Oh,
Did you lie on your CV to get this job?
No. That's, you know, when you start out, you know, when you're kind of starting work, you don't have an awful lot to put on your CV.
And
you say...
What do you write in your CV you shouldn't have?
Okay, oh God, it's all coming out now. I once said that I had done a grade in an instrument that I hadn't, for example.
That's
I don't
dreadful.
know why. Oh, Peter, stop being a little goody-goody.
Goody two shoes.
It's not that deep. Okay, it's not on there anymore also, but it's one of those things that when you maybe start work, you don't have an awful lot on your CV, you think, just kind of make myself sound a little bit more interesting. What it isn't, though, is saying that you've done a whole qualification in something that is really quite challenging, tough,
like
demanding.
a musical instrument.
Damn it!
You walked in that one.
I dug myself into
Which
that
musical
one.
instrument was it?
Oh, look, we're getting away from the story.
No, tell us, what was the musical instrument?
Okay, it was the saxophone, but I do actually play that.
You play the saxophone, just not to us. And what level did you say you played the saxophone to? What level did you say you played?
I really regret bringing this up. This is terrible. I said it was a long time ago.
I'm sure lots of things, lots of things were a long time ago. Doesn't mean we shouldn't talk to them.
It's not on there anymore. And also, I'm not in the cabinet.
You're also not in the cabinet.
It also doesn't remotely impact my ability to do my job. I don't as much.
What if I'd asked you to take out a saxophone and play it to, I don't know, grade 8? No, play us one of your pieces.
I never claimed I was grade 8.
Well,
so it would have been absolutely
what grade did you claim?
5.
5, and what did you actually have?
3.
That's not that bad. You inflated it by a couple of... Yeah. I mean, if they said to play a saxophone...
I just wanted to sound a bit more kind of suave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan Reynolds, anyway, said he was a solicitor and he wasn't. But what are Labour saying about this? Because they're essentially saying, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think... With the Rachel Reeves stories, I think a couple of them I have actually thought sometimes, this is something that there's danger of focusing on a little bit too much. Whether she had her work published in this journal or that journal, it's not great to lie about it, but is it really the end of the world and does it massively impact her ability to do her job? Probably not. This, though, I think is pretty extreme. To say that you actually qualified and ended up doing a job that is a really hard job to do, that lots of people, is competitive, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of training, exams, all of these things you have to pass. To say that you completed that and actually had time working as a qualified solicitor when all you did was train and didn't even complete that training, that's a pretty big lie to have on your CV. And I don't really know how you wiggle yourself out of this. I think he's also slightly made it worse because since this story emerged, everything on his LinkedIn profile has gone about this. Anything about being a solicitor has been removed from his LinkedIn profile, which kind of screams a little bit guilty, I'd say.
Well, we'll see if there's any reaction to that. What I think probably more people care about, of course, is a much more serious story about 3 million people claiming benefits with no obligation to seek work. Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, really does want to change this. What chance do you think she has, and what are her ideas around this?
Well, we heard a couple of months ago the idea of the government saying that they would strip people's driver's licences if they were found to be fraudulently claiming benefits. So that was one kind of idea of a punishment that could be put in place. I think lots of people weren't massively convinced about this. One, because if you wrongly say that someone was claiming benefits and say they live in a rural part of the UK and they don't have much money as it is, taking away their driver's licence would pretty much take away their only livelihood. And secondly, if that isn't the case and they are fraudulently claiming it, then taking away their driver's licence maybe wouldn't be the biggest deal or the biggest end of the world either. So it kind of was seen to be not the most robust punishment there. In terms of actually cracking down, I think There was a story a couple of months ago about the fact that Labour might end up having access to people's bank accounts to check whether or not they were
HMRC do already for some things, yeah.
But this would kind of take that one step further, which has definitely scared quite a few people, and they thought that was a massive overstep of kind of privacy and things like that. So it is a difficult one to grapple with. I do think, though, the important thing to say in this story is that lots of those people claiming this benefit will be for a reason in terms of benefits claimants not looking for work. Some of them will be disabled, so they can't work. Some of them will be sick and unable to work. But the question and the question mark is the people who are claiming it who are able to work,
yes,
or the people who are claiming it who are seen as, who have been classified as unable to work. But actually, the issue is that employers, the government, society aren't doing enough to actually allow them to find jobs that are suitable for their needs.
We have a statement from Kemi Badenoch, which has just been posted on X, Twitter, as most people call it, in response to Donald Trump's comments on Zelensky. This is just we'll get Alicia's reaction to this in a second. President Zelensky is not a dictator. He is the democratically elected leader of Ukraine, who bravely stood up to Putin's illegal invasion, says Kemi Badenoch. Under my leadership and under successive Conservative prime ministers, we have and always will stand with Ukraine. President Trump is right that Europe needs to pull its weight, and that includes the UK. We need to get serious. The Prime Minister will have my support to increase defence spending. There is a fully funded plan to get to 2.5% sitting on his desk. That is, of course, to get to 2.5% of GDP, what the country makes in regard to defence spending. Kemi Badenoch continues, that should be the bare minimum. Starmer should get on with it, get on a plane to Washington and show some leadership. We cannot afford to get this wrong. I mean, in fairness to Keir Starmer, he is going to Washington soon, and I wonder what you make about Kemi Badenoch's comments. Very strong rebuke there for President Trump, Alicia.
Yes, and I think that very much echoes pretty much everybody's feelings about this. I think when Donald Trump came forward and said that he thinks Zelensky is a dictator, I mean, it seems absolutely ludicrous when in this situation we all know that Putin is the dictator. Zelensky, as Kemi Badenoch says, is a democratically elected leader of Ukraine. And this kind of notion that it was Ukraine's fault that the war started, I think is really concerning, coming from the US and coming from Donald Trump. And I don't know what the strategy is. I don't know whether he's potentially trying to slightly cozy up to Vladimir Putin in the sense of just trying to be in his good book so that he thinks he has a better chance of actually stopping the war and being able to negotiate with him, or whether it's something else. But making such bold and huge and inaccurate claims like that, I think, are pretty worrying and dangerous.
Final story I'd like to talk to you about. Net zero will mean higher bills. There's a shock.
Well, yeah. I mean, so this is interesting. This was actually a revelation from Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary himself, that in the short to medium term, that's a quote, bills will increase by the rollout of net zero as a result of rolling out solar farms, wind farms, and all the other kind of mechanisms that would need to be put in place for us to create our own energy that equates to our net zero plans. This isn't a massive shock. People kind of knew that clearly the rollout of these systems would mean an increase in bills. I think the annoying thing, it does, I actually don't think it matters whether you agree or not with net zero. The point here is, why on earth is the cost going to be passed on to the consumer?
And we were told it would go down. We were told it would go down. We were told those bills would come down.
He says afterwards, yeah, it will do long term, but for now you're going to have to kind of bite the bullet. And that, at the moment, when everyone is
so many people
can't do that, I just think is not a great look.
Stephen Cambridge says, I would pay £100 to meet Boris. I would pay £200 to meet Alicia Fitzgerald. I would pay £10 to meet you, Peter, as you're not quite as famous. I joke. Good show.
Steve, I'll meet you for free.
Stuart says, you're so cruel. Poor Alicia will never work again after you've exposed her deceit. Graham says, I've got 5 pence. Can I get change for this for a Cardi P meet and greet? Says Graham in Bushy. And final one from Dawn, who says, Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves and Crazy Ed Miliband are offering a 3-for-2 deal to meet them together. Lots more on the more serious topics, of course, of Ukraine and so many other people wanting to get in on knife crime as well, on migration. We'll talk about that. In fact, we'll take some of your calls, texts and tweets in just a second. But for the meantime, thank you to Alicia Fitzgerald, political correspondent and Grade 3 saxophonist. Stay with us.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much for your company this evening. There's an awful lot to talk about. Zarina says Donald Trump is a traitor to the Western world. Brian says Zelensky should go it alone now with the backing of Europe and distance himself from Trump. He has to plan now for a guerrilla war if Russia occupy Ukraine. Well, I mean, Russia are occupying many parts of Ukraine. Trump has gone, in my estimation, says Brian. Stuart says there is no amount of money Keir Starmer could pay me to suffer him for a whole evening. And Malcolm says, as I understand the history, the whole situation in Ukraine has a lot to do with the eastward expansion of NATO, despite repeated assurances given to Russia since the early 1990s that NATO would not move east. This has happened. Let's talk to Andy in Wokingham about Ukraine. Andy, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Yes, hello Peter, thank you very much indeed. What I've got to say probably goes against the narrative of what you've been hearing about Russia and Ukraine.
That's absolutely fine, Andy. We're the home of free speech. You say what you want to say.
No, that's fine. Thanks ever so much. I mean, the reason that I'm calling really is that I'm getting sort of quite fed up to the back teeth about this sort of constant Russophobia that's absorbing not only the media but obviously the newspapers, etc., and people in general. And there's a lot of scaremongering which is going on, mainly sort of propagated by sort of retired generals and ambassadors who are wheeled out from their country estates to scare people about Putin travelling westwards in due course if he's not stopped in the Ukraine, that he could be banging on the doors of London in 6 months.
I just think that's not. I mean, I probably disagree with you on some points, Andy. But the point about he's going to invade the UK, I've always thought that's nonsense, or indeed other countries as well. I mean, he is failing in. I mean, he hasn't taken over Ukraine. He thought there would be a walk in the park. It hasn't been. They neither have the military capability nor the wherewithal or the desire to attack a NATO country, in my view.
He neither has the intent or the capacity to do that. So I absolutely agree. But when you speak to people, you'd be surprised how many actually feel that he is a threat.
Well, we've been fed that. We've been fed that an awful lot, Andy, and we've been told, a bit like when, JFK said all the world is at stake in West Berlin, as it was at that point. That was communism versus capitalism. And they said, the whole thing is at stake here. We've been fed that line about Ukraine, and I just don't think it's true. I've never thought it's true.
No, that's it, and neither do I. But I think one thing is critically overlooked here, Peter, and this is amongst all the sort of meltdown that is occurring after Donald's latest remarks, is that the West is totally disregarding, as it always has, Russia's legitimate security interest. It's as simple as that. Now, that, in my opinion, is not served by NATO inviting or certainly giving out the positive signals for Ukraine to join that organization, because in essence, no Russian president, whether it's Putin, whether it's Brezhnev, whether it's Popeye the Sailor Man, would ever agree to NATO coming onto Russian southern border, which, as you know, is massive, and planting rockets and nuclear missiles, which could be a threat to the whole of Russia. Now, that just ain't going to happen. And to think that it is, I think, is, living in cuckoo land. So that's number one thing that I would have to say. Number two is, we've got to take a close look also at who are we actually supporting and who are we actually inviting to the West's dining room table, because I've heard a lot of people calling in and listeners who disagree with me, but I've travelled extensively in Western Ukraine, and I've seen for myself how that country operates. And I can assure you, Peter, that Zelensky is de facto dictator of Ukraine, that it is a gangster state for all intents and purposes, which is run by criminal oligarchs.
Very corrupt, isn't it?
Just like Russia.
Well, tell us what you've seen from your. I mean, you're telling us a little bit, but tell us more, Andy, about what you've seen with your own eyes about the corruption of Ukraine, because
with financial corruption, if you want to get anything done, if you want to get any permission, for instance, to I don't know, build an extension or property, you come up against a bureaucracy which is in essence propped up, and this is again something that people don't really realise in the West, by a brutal, nasty secret police, which is funded by Zelensky. It's called the SBU. Yeah, they are no different to Russia's FSB, and they prop up his state and his government, a government which, yes, locks up journalists, a government that denies free speech. I fully understand with you about the issue of deferring elections because the country is in a state of war, about denying use of Russian language in the East. This is not, Peter, this is not a beacon of light of either democracy or good practice.
Okay.
And it's something I think people need to recognise because the two people and the two countries, whether we like it or not, are inextricably linked through language, race, history, culture and mindset.
And that's a very good point in regard to the whole story and telling the whole story around this, which so much of the media does not. Just to make you aware, I'll just read the first line of this statement from Kemi Badenoch. This is in response to what Donald Trump's comments have been on Zelensky, and thank you to Andy for his call there. She says President Zelensky is not a dictator. He is the democratically elected leader of Ukraine who bravely stood up to Putin's illegal invasion. Under my leadership and under successive Conservative Prime Ministers, we have and always will stand with Ukraine. So they're the views of the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch. Thank you to Andy for his thoughts. Gary has been in touch from Yorkshire. Gary, I understand you're a new caller, is that correct?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Well, you're very welcome to the station. What would you like to say, Gary?
Thank you very much. All it is, if Starmer's been saber-rattling, wearing his flak jacket, saying you'll put British boots on in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Can't you just turn around and say, I'm happy to put British boots on the Calais and the French beaches to stop the boats coming, if the French will agree?
I think a lot of people would agree with you, Gary, and that would be one way to at least attempt to stop that.
But I was just hoping someone like, Farage or, someone could mention it in the House of Parliament and then get a conversation going about it, because it's quick enough to rattle his sabre for one thing, but not for another.
And it does say a lot, many people would argue, and I think I'm one of them, that he's talking about defending other countries' borders when he clearly can't defend the borders of this country.
That's correct. I mean, the idea of a government is to protect countries and protect your border.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's the end of it. Thank you.
Gary, listen, thanks for your call. Great first call. Don't make it the last one. Thank you for that, Gary, giving a ring on 0344 499 1000. Thank you to Mike in Lincoln, who says, when I hear callers talking about Russophobia, I get really disappointed with my fellow Brits. Let's all remember Putin has poisoned people with radioactive material here in Britain. That is chemical warfare, and actually an act of warfare. These folks making excuses for Russia and Putin really are appeaseniks and would be welcome at Chamberlain's dinner table, says Mike. Well, listen, we get a wide variety of perspectives on this channel. That's one of the beauties of doing this job. James is in Redhill in Surrey and says, afternoon, Peter. I can honestly say I've never lied in my CV. I used to work as an electrical contractor in construction, and it would become obvious if there was something fishy about it once you started on site. I couldn't stand the shame of being exposed. Shame is a word missing from the government vocabulary. Brilliant show as usual. Thank you very much indeed, James. Good to hear from you. We're going to talk in just a second about a story that has sort of come to light in the last few hours, and this is Emma Raducanu, the tennis player. She says she's going to be all right after a difficult experience where she was targeted by a man who, as it was put, exhibited fixated behaviour at the Dubai Tennis Championship. She was emotional and was seen hiding behind the umpire's chair 2 games into the second round defeat by Karolina Muchova. And the Women's Tennis Association has said the 22-year-old, Emma Raducanu is 22, had been approached by a man who exhibited fixated behaviour on Monday, and the same individual was identified in the first few rows during Emma's match on Tuesday. She alerted the umpire to the situation and was comforted by the 14th seed Muchova as the individual was removed from court 3. She's posted on Instagram and said, thank you for the messages of support. Difficult experience yesterday, but I'll be okay and proud of how I came back and competed despite what happened at the start of the match. Thank you, Karolina, for being a great sport, and best of luck to her for the rest of the tournament. Well, we'll get the latest on this from Amelia Beltrao, who is a TalkSport reporter, and we'll talk to Joe Hemmings as well, a behavioural and media psychologist, in just a few minutes here on Talk.
They would do another 7th of October. So, I guess that the world is realizing what we have been fighting for the last 16 months.
Right. And so this is generally being called phase 2, right, of the hostage release?
We're still in phase 1.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But phase 2 is about to be negotiated or about to start again
Yes, so there are negotiations about phase 2. Israel clearly wants all of the hostages back. Right. We have still about, as of now, we still have 73 hostages, but we will still have about 60 plus hostages.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Adam in Southend sent me a lovely message. I try not to read out self-congratulatory messages because I think, you shouldn't really do that as a presenter. But Adam says, great call from Andy. Well done, Pete, for listening. There are other presenters that would maybe not be willing to do that. Well, Adam, what I always try to think, without getting too sort of philosophical or grand about this, is that this is my show, but it's your show too. And actually, if people want to say things that are free speech within the law, well, that's the whole point of this station. That's the whole point. And 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Whatever you want to say, if you want to tell me I'm talking absolute nonsense, as long as you do it in a reasonable way where you don't shout abuse at me, we will put you on the air. And I mean, that's okay. And we say loads of different things to one another, and we disagree without being disagreeable. And, what I try to do with every single show that I do is put as many people on the air as possible. It's great having guests on. It's great talking to politicians and different thinkers and think tank people and, commentators and so on. But really, it's about you. This is your station. And there's so few stations that actually listen to what their viewers and listeners say. But we are one of them, and I want to continue that as long as I'm sitting in this chair. Right then, let's go to a story that's emerged this afternoon. This is Emma Raducanu, who's had a difficult experience in Dubai at the Dubai Tennis Championships. Amelia Beltrao is TalkSport reporter. She's with us now. Amelia, great to have you in the studio. Tell me what's happened here.
So, as you say, Emma was playing in the Dubai Tennis Championship. She was playing the 14th seed, Karolina Muchova. She was 2 games down. This was yesterday on Tuesday, and she noticed someone in the crowd, and it made her immediately uncomfortable. She went to hide behind the umpire's chair. She was visibly upset. Her opponent was having to console her. She wasn't sure whether she was going to go through with it. Eventually, the man was removed from the grounds, and he has now been banned from all WTA tournaments. But for her, this was a big thing. She's come out on social media today, saying she's very proud with how she dealt with it, saying it was a very difficult experience because this man in particular had approached her just the day before on the Monday. It's also not the first time Emma's experienced, to some extent, stalking allegations or fixated behaviour. Back in 2022, a man walked 23 miles to her London home. I believe she was just 19 at the time. And there's also widespread, it goes for many female players across the tennis game, where Katie Boulter, fellow British player, she's also said she's experienced men following her or just this kind of unusual fixated behaviour as well.
What happens now then? This guy, as you say, he is banned from all these matches, and Emma Raducanu went back in, but she's been knocked out of this particular tournament,
Yeah,
hasn't
so she did go on to lose the rest of the game, but she, as she mentioned in her social media post, that she was very proud that she actually managed to fight on. You know, many people thought, oh, this was going to be her crumbling point, she wasn't going to be able to fight back, but she did go on to fight back. She did eventually lose the game. What we understand now is that the WTA will now do an investigation into this person, what kind of behaviour it was, because it's still not very clear exactly what happened. They're just using the term fixated behaviour. So it kind of needs a bit more further investigation as to what actually happened on that Monday to then happening on Tuesday that made Emma reduce to tears, thinking she's not going to be able to continue her match.
Amelia, thank you. That's Amelia Beltrao, though, who's a TalkSport reporter. And yes, just as Amelia was saying there, Emma Raducanu paying tribute to her competitor, the 14th seed, Karolina Muchova, said, thank you, Karolina, for being a great sport, and best of luck to her for the rest of the tournament. Well, let's get into this a bit more with Jo Hemmings, who's a behavioural and media psychologist. Jo, thanks for joining us this evening. What does fixated behaviour actually mean? How can that term be? It can be used in all sorts of different ways, of course, but what does it mean, and what do we think it means in this instance from what we know, Jo?
Hi, Peter.
Hi there.
It can either mean stalking, which we all recognise as a word, or it can mean obsessive behaviour. So he would have done something that sort of threw her game. He might have blown her kisses from the sidelines. He might have been staring at her in a way she felt compelled to look back. Whatever he was doing, it was something because she had seen him the day before delivering a letter to her hotel. She caught his eye, and they're very exposed and vulnerable, particularly female tennis players. You know, it's a kind of a sport where it's not, the barriers aren't there as much as they are, and lots of matches. And of course, they're playing individually rather than a team. And if someone makes noises or gestures at them or stares at them, it's very hard in a tennis match not to notice it. And it's very easy for that person who is fixated to completely throw their game because they know the impact they're going to have on that individual who is going to get upset and distressed.
How big a problem is this within sport, and particularly for women?
I think it's a bigger problem for women for fairly obvious reasons. It's generally, but not universally, men that tend to have that fixated behaviour. Look, it comes about because either somebody's got maybe a personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, has an insecure attachment, is lonely, but they have this thing called a parasocial relationship, which means they think they know that sportswoman better than they actually do. They know her agenda, her schedule, where she is, what she's posting online. It's very easy to trace where somebody lives and where they're playing, for example. And if you can, you'll go to those matches, and it's very easy to distress an individual player much more so than it is when you're part of a team, of course.
Emma Raducanu is an adult. She is 22 years old, but she experienced a huge degree of global fame, really, particularly fame here in the UK at a very young age. How much is age part of this as well, as particularly in terms of how people cope with these things? Because they're dealing with, you know, riches, people throwing money at you, everybody wants a piece of you at a young age. We've seen that, of course, in so many different sports, but also in entertainment, in all other ways. What would your advice be to someone like Emma Raducanu to try to deal with the pressures of fame, and particularly when things do go past a line, as clearly happened here?
I think she dealt with it in this instance very well. She had a very supportive co-player with her. She didn't try and ignore it. She did respond to it. Look, you know, she's very vulnerable and very exposed. She's very young. She has had it happen to her before. I mean, there isn't, because of the nature of the game of tennis, it's very hard to ignore it. But, you know, she needs a good support system. people she can talk to. The guy's now never being allowed to a WTA tennis match again. I'm going to say sorry. And so, you know, she can only sort of learn from her experience. She can never, everybody's vulnerable, everybody's human. It feels very uncomfortable to be that exposed to someone who could cause you harm. And at the end of the day, that, of course, is her fear.
Joe, thank you for that analysis there. That's Joe Hemmings, a behavioural and media psychologist. We heard a little bit earlier on from Amelia Beltrao, who is a talkSPORT reporter, and that's about Emma Raducanu, the tennis player, being targeted by a man apparently exhibiting fixated behaviour. And Declan, who's in Hitchin, says, I would bet that that gentleman fixated on Emma Raducanu, if he is not a United Arab Emirates citizen, obviously this happened in Dubai, will be on a flight out of Dubai within hours without much discussion of his rights to family life. On other matters, Barry's been in touch and says it's a shame Neville Chamberlain will always be remembered for his appeasement of Hitler. When he was Chancellor in the mid-30s, he provided the RAF with funds to develop the Spitfire and Hurricane and set up a state-of-the-art air defence system. Chamberlain was an honourable man. We have much to be grateful to him for. Barry, I wonder if you've read the book Munich by Robert Harris, who is my favourite author. There's also a very good Netflix drama about it as well. I'd recommend both if you haven't encountered them. Maybe you have already, Barry, but a big fan of Robert Harris here, and certainly I think it I don't know if rehabilitates Chamberlain. It certainly looks at him in a very, very different way anyway, and I'd highly recommend that, Barry. Mac in Glasgow says, Trump has a cheek cussing Zelensky as a dictator. Zelensky is a proper democratically elected leader of his country. We need to remember the riots on the White House after Trump lost his election before. If Trump has only avoided imprisonment this time, it's because he is immune from prosecution now as president. He's not quite immune from prosecution, but you're not far off, Mac. I can't help but think Trump is Putin's lapdog and working for him. Why was Ukraine and Europe not invited to the US-Russia negotiations? Great show, says Mac in Glasgow. There's lots more to discuss on that. We're going to do that in the next hour, so fear not, and we'll make sure we get as many calls, texts and tweets as we can on the programme. Be sure to, you can send in your voice notes, of course, on 0344 499 1000. We'll talk more about knife crime. We talked about that a little bit earlier on with Peter Blexley. Rupert Matthews is a police and crime commissioner in Leicester, and Ken Hines is a knife crime stop and search campaigner. We're going to talk to them about the new knife crime laws that the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has brought in, and tell us what you think about that as well. We'll also talk about the BBC, which is accused of using a Hamas official's son in a documentary about quote-unquote ordinary Palestinians. We'll talk to Robert Halfon, the former Conservative minister, about that as well, and we'll also have a chat about the cost of net zero. Surprise, surprise, it's going to add money to your bills. Let me know what you think about all of these matters. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Back with you soon.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Great to have your company this evening. Lots to talk about, including new life laws, which apparently will make a difference. That's what the victim's sister, the law's been named after her brother. And there is speculation, which I think is nonsense, that the Amazon boss Jeff Bezos could face prison over knife sales to children. I just don't think that bit of the law is going to be implemented in that way. We're going to talk about the BBC as well. They used a Hamas official's son in a documentary about quote-unquote ordinary Palestinians. Yes, really. Shocker from the BBC there, except it's not a shocker at all. Hamas, as we know, are going to release 6 hostages and bodies of those young children from the Bibas family as well. That's going to happen over the next few days. Absolutely awful, and just more psychological terror from those terrorists. We'll talk about net zero as well, meaning higher bills, according to Ed Miliband. Hardly a shock there. We were told, of course, it was going to bring our bills down. That was not true. Who'd have thought? We're going to talk more about all those issues and whatever else you want to talk about, whether it's Putin, knife crime, Zelensky. Do you think he's a dictator? Lots of words from Zelensky, from Trump as well, and indeed from Kemi Badenoch in the last half an hour. So let me know your thoughts on any of that. 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note, 0344 499 1000 on WhatsApp. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message on that number, or ring me on that number for a discussion, live discussion on the air. We'll have plenty more of those before Kevin O'Sullivan comes up at 7 o'clock. Let's get the discussion started for the final hour of this programme here on Talk Drive. Just got a message from Amanda in London just about what we're talking about just for the news there in regard to Emma Raducanu. She said it's odd every time Emma Raducanu is not doing well in a match. It seems an old injury appears or she feels unwell. I fear the fame and success perhaps happened too young. Maybe she's not able to cope with not winning. Well, Amanda, certainly she has had a huge success, of course. It must be very, very difficult psychologically, and they have all sorts of sports psychologists and people to look after them, but she's clearly been through a very, very tough time in Dubai, and we've been reflecting that. We're also going to talk now about new knife crime laws. This is an interesting one because Yvette Cooper, who is the Home Secretary, has been talking about this. She's been setting out what these new laws will do.
We need stronger action to tackle this dangerous knife crime that is killing children, and we've seen lethal weapons in the hands of children, and we cannot go on with families being devastated in this way. And that is why we're introducing this major crackdown on online knife sales. It's Ronan's Law in memory of Ronan Kander, who was killed here in the West Midlands, because it's so important that we take action to protect our children.
The new measures, as Yvette Cooper was saying there, will be known as Ronan's Law. That is after the 16-year-old Ronan Kander. He was murdered close to his home 3 years ago after being stabbed in the back and chest. It was a case of mistaken identity, absolutely horrendous. He was a very promising young man. And his sister, Nikita Kander, well, she spoke to my colleague Ian Collins on Talk a little bit earlier today.
My brother, you know, as you would know, he was mistaken identity. He wasn't intended target of the attack. However, you know, 6 weeks before Ronan was murdered, the murderer went after his intended target, and you know, police were aware. Nothing was kind of done to ensure that murderer doesn't go on to do what he did. He used his mum's ID. He was ordering them in a period of 6 months, so he was actually harbouring loads of weapons into his home. Wow. And he was a self-admitted arms dealer. And on the day, he went to his local post office, didn't get ID, didn't get any checks, collected the weapon, went on later that day and took my brother's life. We are trying to do everything we possibly can to make it harder, to put in more barriers for the future, and to not allow weapons that are clearly just being designed to seriously harm and murder people to be allowed to be sold freely. and for those who are creating these weapons and for those who are profiting off them and advertising them, they need to be held to account.
That is Nikita Kanda there. She is the sister of Ronan Kanda, who was murdered close to his home 3 years ago. 16-year-old boy who was stabbed in the back and chest in a case of mistaken identity. Ken Hines is the knife crime and stop and search campaigner. Ken, thank you for joining us this evening on this programme. Do you think these new knife crime laws that Yvette Cooper is proposing are going to make a difference?
Look, I would just like to first of all, just pay my deepest condolence to the Ronan's family and all those affected by his horrendous murder, when he had so much to live for. So I'm really got to acknowledge that. I've also got to acknowledge the fight that the family's doing, particularly sister, in getting to this point here where they've got a law out in his name, because they were determined not for him to be dying in vain. And who am I to say how they should go about making a difference or bringing that energy? But what I can say to you, if we want to look at the deeper issues around knife crime, because it's not the knife holding the knife itself, it's a person holding a knife, who's holding the knife. And simply, I would say they will find other avenues to do their menace, to do the devil's work. My thing is that we can't be there at every avenue to safeguard them. But what we can do is start working on people's emotional mindsets about coming together, letting them check in with what is emotionally troubling them in a safe space. That's the way forward.
It's interesting as well, there does need to be both a carrot and a stick in this.
Yes.
I'm sure you would agree. And I just wonder if any of the measures you think will make much of a difference. Increased prison sentences for selling weapons to under 18s for either individuals who have possessed a sale or a company chief executive. Retailers being required to bring in stronger photo identity checks for buyers, both at points of sale and delivery. A new offence of possession with violent intent, and a consultation on registration and licensing scheme for online knife sellers. Because the things you're talking about, and I know you've worked very, very hard, and there are many people who do work very hard to try to dissuade people from this, but the stick aspect does need to happen as well.
It does, but it's happening not in the heart of where it needs to be. At the end of a day, that's people will take up weapons from anywhere, the kitchen particularly. You go in there, you got implements, you can use anything, a bottle, whatever it is, can be used as a weapon. And we have to look at really, as I said, no alternative but to the mindset. These sentences may tighten up a loophole that's there, and it's to be welcome. But as for the actual reduction and reducing the violence on our streets, it needs a different tack altogether. And that tack is getting people with the skill set to go into the schools from nursery to work on people and young people's mindset. Let them know they're going to have challenges throughout life, but they're going to have also the tools to recognize when that red mist is coming, so that you can take action within your own self-worth.
And to take action to prevent those things. Ken, thank you. That's Ken Hines there, who's a knife crime and stop and search campaigner. Rupert Matthews is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Leicester. He's a Conservative. Rupert, thank you for joining me this evening. Do you think Yvette Cooper's plan is going to make a difference?
Well, I'm sure it will help, but as your previous guest just said, it's not the knives themselves that do the killing, it's the person wielding it. And fatal knives can be picked up in any kitchen. A cricket bat can be a fatal weapon if used in the wrong way. What we need to do, first of all, is to empower the police on stop and search and support them when they're doing that, but also get into schools and youth clubs with younger people and work with them, particularly those that are in an environment where there is a temptation to get involved with crime, and particularly with gangs, and get them away from it.
I wonder, can you retrofit this stuff? I mean, if people are 15 or 16 or perhaps even younger, 12 or 13, and they are thinking about having a knife or acquiring a knife, or in that culture where sometimes knives wrongly, always wrongly, solve problems or are seen to solve problems. Can you retrofit that? Can you say, if you've already had that mindset, if you've got to that age and that is the culture that you're living in, or that is the system by which you think works, can you then say to a 12 or 13-year-old, actually, no, that's not the way things are, and change their mindset? And perhaps if they've been brought up in part of society where that is seen as a solution.
Well, the older they get and the further down the line they go and getting involved with criminality, the more difficult it becomes. But yeah, one of the key points at which you can steer somebody away from a criminal career is the first time that they get arrested. And if you step in then, yes, you can retrofit this stuff and you can do it, but it takes dedicated staff, it takes well-trained staff. But it is possible, but really you need to be getting in there earlier. You need to be starting at the age of maybe 10, 11, 12, and working with these children who are in difficult circumstances then. But also you do need to be doing the more hardline basic policing stuff of stop and search, of searching through parks and hedgerows and so on with metal detectors, because of course criminals, if they know they're going to get stopped and searched, don't carry a knife. They'll stash it somewhere out of sight where they know they can get at it easily. And if the police officers go out with metal detectors, find them and remove them, that is another knife off the street. You've got to come at this from many different angles in order for it to be effective.
Thank you very much for your thoughts there. There's Rupert Matthews, who's the Police and Crime Commissioner for Leicester. He's a Conservative. Joe has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Joe, another new caller, I think. You're very welcome to the airwaves. What would you like to say?
Thanks, Peter. I am indeed a new caller. I've been listening to your show for the last few weeks and didn't even know you existed, to be honest with you, without offending you.
That's all right. Well, now you know.
But most of the topics that you've covered, the bit I want to touch on, I think it really does cover multiple topics, and that being surrounding law and the way that, I'll probably say, the Western world now conducts itself. I'll give you a little bit of background there. I've just come back from Singapore. I was living there for 4 years. My wife's from the Philippines, her first time in the UK this year, and she's been living in Singapore for the past 15 years. You know, and all of the topics, actually, migration, illegal migration, knife crime, you know, you name it. None of those crimes are committed in Singapore at all. It is a safe, beautiful place to live. You know, it's made up, the main makeup of people living in Singapore are Malaysian Singaporeans, Chinese Singaporeans, Indian Singaporeans, and the rest of the population made up of expats, working expats. If you go to Singapore, you work or you do not get a visa. If you go to Singapore or live in Singapore, you abide by the laws, or you, irrespective of who you are, where you grew up, what you're doing in that country, you will feel full punishment of the law. And that goes from caning to hanging. And consequently, that creates an environment where it's almost perfect, paradise to live.
I must say, Joe, I think that, I mean, I'd love the levels I love a low level of crime. That would be marvellous. I don't want a society that hangs people. I don't want to live in that society.
But we have a society that, with all the constant problems that we're discussing now, based on no level of punishment, like knife crime, for example. The deterrent is what? Everyone's talking about the knives. The knives are not the problem. The punishment of the crime is the issue. There isn't one.
Okay. Joe, really interesting thoughts there. Welcome back to the UK. Presumably your wife finds it pretty cold here.
Oh, it's not just cold. You know, she'd only seen London on the TV before, and she grew up in Manila, and she came back and said, you know, is this really a first world country? And I said, I've got no comment on that, my love.
Well, indeed. Well, listen, you're both very welcome back here anyway. Joe, thank you. First call from you, but don't make it the last one. Very, very interesting. Even though Joe and I disagreed there a little bit, doesn't matter. On this programme, on all my programmes, we disagree without being disagreeable. Thanks to Joe for his call. Plenty more calls coming, and we are going to talk as well to Robert Halfon, the former Conservative government minister, about a number of things, but specifically about the BBC being accused of using a Hamas official's son in a documentary supposedly about ordinary Palestinians. Could it be that Hamas terrorists had some sort of editorial control over this? Well, the BBC says no. It was called Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. We'll find out what Robert Halfon thinks in just a minute here on Talk.
Breaking news this morning revealed that under the Terrorist Act, 242 people were arrested in the year to June of this year.
Something you can indulge in as to all the people who aren't going to prison because, well, there's no prison spaces.
So this is a Talk exclusive we've been looking at.
I said, you take these cuffs off me and speak to me like a human being rather than a common criminal.
You're just left wondering, do these people who lead us actually hate Britain?
Yeah.
Do they not love our country and everything that we've stood for?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, it's a really busy news day here at Talk. There's loads to talk about. We've been talking about Zelensky saying that Trump lives in the disinformation space created by Russia. We've been talking about knife crime. We've been talking about all sorts of things. And David is the next person who's going to contribute. He is from Gloucestershire. David, thanks for the call, 0344 499 1000. What would you like to say about knife crime? I think you've given us a ring about.
Oh, sorry, that's me. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, it's you. Go ahead.
Hiya, Peter. Yeah, I was just sort of saying about knife crime. I really do believe the police need to set up special squads up and down the country, equipped with knife arches, and they can, and then they can go as if anybody gets caught with a knife, I think they, I know you can't jail everybody, but I think they should be tagged for a minimum of 5 years, just as a starter.
Do we have enough police to do that? Do we have enough knife arches? Do we have enough resources?
Well,
I'd love that to happen, David. I'd love that to happen.
Well, we keep wasting all this money on everything else. We can find $9 billion to go to the Chagos Islands. I'm sure we can find a couple of billion to do that quite comfortably.
It's a very good point.
But the other thing is that I think is more important. If you do cause a fatality with a knife, I think you have to hang. And that's it. And I don't think there's any way to stop it now.
Well, I personally am against capital punishment. I don't think it's a deterrent. I don't think it works. I don't think it's what we should be doing as a society. And I think it's a lot worse for people to rot in prison for many years than to have a nice, straightforward death by a needle in their arm or by hanging.
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, I have actually said if capital punishment isn't allowed, then maybe we need to set up a special prison with special isolation cells that they do sit and just watch the world and rot. Not say rot, but they're not allowed to interact with anybody and make them really.
And there's the whole question about our prisons and also whether whole life sentences are needed. It's a big debate, and thanks very much indeed for your comments there, David in Gloucestershire. If you want to contribute to the debate between now and 7 o'clock, you agree, disagree with David or me, think I'm wrong on capital punishment, maybe you think he's wrong, 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk now about a BBC documentary. Well, I call it a documentary. It's called Gaza: How to Survive a War Zone. This is a documentary which says it is showing the conflict through the eyes of 3 children in Gaza. Now, slight issue here in that one of the people who was narrating it was, surprise, surprise, the son of a Hamas terrorist, a very senior Hamas terrorist. Well, Robert Halfon is a former Conservative government minister, and we know this has been released by the BBC, it's been on, but it's also in the context of the talks that are happening, the fact that there is a very fragile ceasefire and there are various hostages being released by Hamas terrorists, but also the fact that 6 more of them are to come in the next few days, including the bodies, and they are bodies, sadly, of the Bibas family, the children who were murdered by Hamas, perhaps not on the 7th of October, but in the period in between then and now, the 7th of October, of course, being those horrendous atrocities that can never be forgotten that Hamas terrorists visited on the Israeli people. And of course, we've had such a horrendous time for so many innocent Gazan civilians since that. And the boy himself may well be an innocent civilian, but his father appears not to be. Robert Halfon is a former Conservative government minister, is with us now. Robert, what do you make of this?
Well, the tragedy of this is that the BBC have form on promoting Hamas. They accused Israel of bombing a hospital. They refused to call Hamas terrorists, although they called Al-Qaeda terrorists. They call them militants, as if they were some kind of left-wing sect from Liverpool City Council. Many Jewish people have expressed real horror about the way the BBC have treated this awful conflict and everything that happened since October the 7th. And what we need to remember is that Hamas is an extreme Islamist cult that wants to eradicate every Jew from the earth, that wants an Islamist state. And the BBC should not be promoting or supporting or allowing people associated with Hamas to provide propaganda for their documentaries.
There was, I think it was David Collier, who is an investigative journalist, who put all this together and made it pretty clear pretty quickly that the young boy was related to the senior Hamas. I mean, they call him an official. I mean, he's a terrorist. I should say a BBC spokesperson. We don't know whether it's man or woman. Maybe they don't know either. A BBC spokesman, I'm just going to say 50% chance of accuracy, said, Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, a documentary showing the conflict through the eyes of 3 children in Gaza, was produced in line with BBC editorial guidelines, and the BBC had full editorial control. The film told the children's own stories, showing viewers their direct experiences of living through a war, and the children's parents did not have any editorial input. As the BBC has previously explained, the film was edited and directed from London, as independent international journalists are not allowed into Gaza. The film gives audiences a rare glimpse of Gaza during the war, as well as an insight into the children's lives. It hears the voices of other Gazan civilians, several of whom voice anti-Hamas sentiments. I mean, my question, Robert, is how can they say they had full editorial control and then in the next paragraph say the film was edited and directed from London because independent international journalists are not allowed into Gaza? How can you have full editorial control when you're not on the ground? How can you know everything that goes into the making? I've made documentaries before, not loads, but I've made a few. I've been involved in lots of making of television as a producer, and unless you're actually physically there, it is very, very difficult to know all the circumstances that are going on in regard to creating television.
Well, I think the statements they've issued to try and cover their own back And as I say, they've got form on this. You know, the BBC, in my view, during this conflict has been a hostile place for Jewish people, without a shadow of a doubt. Some of the coverage has been incredibly one-sided. And let's have a documentary about the children who were taken hostages, or the women who were sexually assaulted and abused and murdered. It'd be interesting to see if the BBC ever did anything like that.
In fairness to the BBC, they did. It wasn't made by the BBC, but there was a Storyville documentary about the Nova Music Festival. I expect you saw it, which was very good and did.
But they didn't produce that.
Yeah.
And that's one thing, and yet you've had a one-way kind of partisan, not across the whole BBC, but a fair bit of it. And you just have to read this chap called Daniel Cohen, who used to be a very senior BBC news person, who writes regularly in the Telegraph newspaper about the upset that has been caused about the partisan approach that the BBC takes. They seem to be sort of giving succor to Hamas. In some ways, you could argue, are they just Hamas's useful idiots, just reporting propaganda, when they should be presenting a very fair and objective point of view as to what has gone on and why this conflict was caused in the first place.
Even when you turn on the BBC News channel, for example, which is meant to be the gold standard, a global channel, it's meant to be what the licence fee is all about. We have seen on numerous occasions, and most recently in the last couple of weeks, that they seem to confuse hostages and prisoners. The hostages are the ones taken by Hamas terrorists. The prisoners are the ones who have broken the law and are in Israeli prisons, many of whom have carried out huge and devastating and dreadful acts against Israeli people. And they seem to call, and certainly have in the little straps at the bottom of the screen, they have called Palestinian prisoners hostages at various points. It's impossible in any news organisation to get everything right all the time. We make mistakes here, but there does seem to be a particular attitude at the BBC in this particular issue, Robert.
Yeah, so the problem with the BBC is that they have a moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel. Israel is a democratic state fighting for its survival and recovering from the awful massacre that happened on October the 7th. Hamas is an extreme Islamist cult, but the BBC just treat them as moral equivalents. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning, that they won't even call Hamas a terrorist group, even though the British government outlaw Hamas. They define Hamas as a terrorist.
As do many governments, certainly. I wonder what you make of Labour MPs. This is quite a few of them, actually. There's one from the SDLP in Northern Ireland. There are some members of the House of Lords as well, who say that Gazans should be given refuge in Britain in the same way as Ukrainians have been. What do you make of this letter?
Well, it's a ludicrous statement to make. There's no need for them to be given refuge. If all the Arab countries who are supporting Gaza, they have plenty of room. They can go if they want refuge. Why can't the Arab countries, of which there are plenty? If you remember, Israel is smaller than Wales. Gaza is a tiny strip of that. Why can't they go to the Arab countries and take refuge? Why do they need to come to England? It's a completely nonsense argument. Well, I'm very proud we've taken in Ukrainian refugees and Afghanistan refugees who helped the British military when we were in Afghanistan. But the idea that people from Gaza need to come here, they've got plenty of places, plenty of Arab countries, and those Arab countries, they say they support the Palestinians. Well, let's put their money where their mouth is.
I would also like the Irish to put their money where their mouth is. The Republic of Ireland, one of the most pro-Palestinian countries in the world, has said, surprise, surprise, they're not going to take any Gazan refugees or whatever you want to call them. I wonder more broadly, Robert, what your thoughts are in regard to the ceasefire at the moment. We are being told there will be more hostages coming back. That would presumably leave around 50 hostages there. I know there are some schools of thought that say there are thoughts that only about half of them are alive. They're mostly soldiers and male soldiers as well. Where does this go next, do you think?
Well, thank God the hostages have been released, and when you see them being released with the Hamas people screaming around them, it looks like something out of the 1789 French Revolution around the guillotine. And we saw those 2 hostages who'd almost looked like concentration camp survivors. They were so thin last week, and then only a few days ago,
they're the people who've actually been starving in Gaza.
Exactly, and only a few days ago, you had they made them hold a test tube, a timer, in terms of reminding them as a propaganda tool. I mean, it's barbaric. It really is barbaric, and Israel has had to release hundreds of Palestinian terrorists. These are people who've committed terrorist atrocities in return to get a few hostages back every week. But it's the right thing to do, because at the end of the day, Israel has to protect its own citizens and bring them back out of the tunnels of Gaza from the clutches of Hamas, even though Israel's having to make enormous sacrifices to get these hostages back. But I fear that many will be dead. You can see how badly that they have been treated by Hamas. The Red Cross have not been in there to see them, which of course doesn't happen in other conflicts, by the way, and no one seems to bat an eyelid about that. But God willing, those as many hostages that are still alive will be released, so we can get them back into freedom and safety once and for all.
Robert, thank you. That's Robert Halfon, who's a former Conservative government minister. Thank you to Mick, who says, I wish somebody would do a documentary on the far left employees of the BBC and identify them all. Louise says, how about the BBC makes a documentary about seeing through the eyes of Jewish children being taken hostage by Hamas, or perhaps they can't because so many of them have been murdered, says Louise. Stuart says, if the BBC were being neutral regarding Gaza, they would have followed 3 Israeli children living on the border, perhaps with one of them being related to a hostage, another losing family members slaughtered in the October the 7th massacre, says Stuart. And Brian says, regarding the BBC, from a world-renowned and respected broadcaster, it now finds itself ridiculed, but to add insult to injury, we have to pay for the privilege to watch and listen to it. Well, in the interest of fairness, I want to read out the statement again from a BBC spokesman. Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, a documentary showing the conflict through the eyes of 3 children in Gaza, was produced in line with BBC editorial guidelines, and the BBC had full editorial control. The film told the children's own stories, showing viewers their direct experiences of living through a war, and the children's parents did not have any editorial input. As the BBC has previously explained, the film was edited and directed from London, as independent international journalists are not allowed into Gaza. The film gives audiences a rare glimpse of Gaza during the war, as well as an insight into the children's lives. It hears the voices of other Gazan civilians, several of whom voice anti-Hamas sentiments. I mean, there's a couple of things in that statement that are patently wrong. I think it's very interesting as well in regard to an insight into the children's lives, and also the fact, the reminder, and I think this is actually a failure of the Israeli government as much as it is a failure of Hamas, to say that independent international journalists are not allowed into Gaza. I'd allow them in. I would let them show exactly what's been going on there, because we have been duped by Hamas terrorists for such a long time, who have been telling us words like genocide, which are factually untrue. They've been saying that people have been starving. The only people I've seen starving in Gaza are those hostages. I'd love to be contradicted. I'd love to know why I'm wrong, and no one has told me why I'm wrong. Anyway, listen, there's a lot more to discuss. If you want to discuss that, give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. We're going to discuss net zero now. Apparently it's going to mean higher bills, according to Ed Miliband's acolytes. That hear the distant sounds as we all fall down in thuds of shock. Stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you to everybody who's been in touch. I'll read out some of those tweets in a minute or two. Quite a lot of activity on Twitter, including a debate about whether I'm fat, which is not one I encourage people to get involved with, because the answer is I am. Anyway, let's talk about net zero. Big bills, fat bills, higher bills, admitted by Ed Miliband's officials. This is going to temporarily push energy bills higher. Ben Pyle is the co-founder of Climate Debate UK. Temporarily, Ben, do you believe that?
Telegraph article that reported this fact actually found a website where that's been the case for 2 years or so. So there is a website that some official has written something on saying, yes, it's going to temporarily increase bills. Yeah, shock, horror, and nobody knew. Of course, it's not temporary, and you can see that if the arithmetic of energy pricing in the UK of the net zero agenda is such that it is impossible for bills to go down and for there to be more wind turbines and more solar panels, and that is because producing power from wind or from sunshine on the arrangements that the government has the contracts that the government has arranged through the contracts of different schemes means that electricity from wind and solar is more expensive than power from gas, right? So if you take some gas, and the gas is 4p, which is about the price that the gas is at the moment for a kilowatt hour of energy, and you turn that into electricity, it's going to cost 8p, and that's the minimum that you're going to, the minimum price that you can expect from wind farms or from solar panels. So the government likes to blame the global markets. They call them global markets. There's no such thing as a global market for gas, and they like to blame foreign dictators, and they like to blame market mechanisms for their failures. But the fact is, the reason that gas has increased in price is because the British government has tried to dissuade people, investors and developers from exploiting Britain's oil and gas reserves, right? So we've got this energy profits levy attached to the North Sea oil and gas exploration, existing oil and gas exploration. We've got the government saying before it came into power that there will be no new oil and gas licenses.
They said quite a lot before they came into power, didn't they? They said that bills would go down by hundreds of pounds.
Yeah, I've compiled all of the social media, Labour Party,
well, just remind us what they said, because Dave in South Oxfordshire.
They've said everything. They've said, I've got one that says 400, one that says 300, one that says 600, one that says 900, and one that says that Labour will reduce your bills by £1,000. And but since they've come to power, the energy price cap has been increased in 2 times already, one in October, one at the beginning of the year, and it's going to go up again in April, blamed on global markets. So they're just it's just lie after lie after lie. And actually the price of gas on the international market has doubled in a year, but that's only a very small price of your total electricity, the price you pay for electricity. So as I said, price of electricity from gas is about 8 on the wholesale market is about 8p per kilowatt hour, but by the time you pay for it, by the time it's gone down the wires, you're paying nearly 25 pence at the moment. It's going to go up again, of course. So 2/3 of the cost of electricity has got nothing to do with the price of gas. That's all to do with wind farms, having to balance wind farms, because sometimes the wind doesn't blow. So the government strategy, the new government strategy, I think the last government was starting to realise that this wasn't going to work. The new Ed Miliband's strategy is to lie and lie and lie and lie, and then little bits of truth get out that it's going to be more expensive. And so what's his response? He does a social media TikTok video. He dances around with a ukulele in front of a wind farm, where he does a sort of 30-minute skit where he says how great, how many jobs are going to be created, how many, how it's going to lower bills. It's just to repeat, it's gaslighting essentially, because everyone at home who's reading it, they're gonna be paying more and more for their electricity and gas.
It's gaslighting, but the gas might be more expensive. Dave in South Oxfordshire says, what is the base for the £300 reduction in energy bills? The whole thing was yet another Labour con, he says.
It's just complete. I mean, there's never been a more consistently fibbing government and that I can remember. And it would be great if someone could hold the government to account, but it's always jam tomorrow, right? So they'll say, well, in 5 years' time there'll be lower bills.
But they don't know. The thing is, they just don't know, Ben. They don't know what it's going to be.
We can know because they've agreed. Unlike the gas markets, unlike the markets for gas and other energy commodities, we have agreed, or the government has agreed on our behalf, that wind farm developers get set prices for the power that they produce, right? And they're usually multiples of what can be produced from gas, for multiples of the price. They're called strike prices. The subsidy scheme is called contracts for difference. So that means that all of the green energy developers and operators have guaranteed profits for the next 15 to 20 years, right? That, unlike anyone, and that's not available to anyone else doing anything else, right? It's a complete distortion of the market. So what's happened? All the money all the willing investment into British energy has gone into these guaranteed profit schemes, right? So that means that all of the other forms of energy have become more expensive and less reliable. So it's got to get more and more and more expensive because this is a distortion. This is like a socialist central planning system using something that looks like a market mechanism, but which it isn't. So it's
Ben, thank you very much. That's Ben Pyle there, is the co-founder of Climate Debate UK. Spokesman for the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero said every family in the country has paid the price of Britain's dependence on global fossil fuel markets. That is why we are sprinting to clean, homegrown energy so the UK can take back control of its energy with cleaner, affordable power. As shown by independent analysis from the National Energy System Operator, clean power by 2030 is achievable, more secure, and could see a lower cost of electricity and lower bills. Levies drive investment in renewables, which will secure greater energy independence and protect bill payers from future energy shocks. It's all going to be marvellous. It's all going to be marvellous. Everything will be fine. Colin has been in touch from Durham. Colin, I understand you're a former police officer. You're almost uniquely placed then to give us your perspective on the knife crime story we've been discussing today. I wonder if you think the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper's measures are going to work.
No, they're not. The trouble is, the only time, Peter, knife crime has fallen was between 2010 2015, and we did it by what we get paid to do is policing, using stop and search. Now, you can look at the figures, you'll see we did use a lot of stop and search, but knife crime fell. Then in 2015, Theresa May, the then Home Secretary, changed the rules, and ever since then, knife crime has gone up. Now, I know Boris tried to change it when he came to power. Unfortunately, Boris wasn't the brightest of people, and he changed the wrong stop and search. There's two, actually. One that every policeman uses every day, and one where you need an inspector to give you authority to. He changed one where you need the inspector to change authority to. So the only way, effectively, where we're going to stop knife crime is what you would do for any other crime. If this was robberies, you'd use the full force of the law and stop it. And it's quite annoying when you hear that police crime commissioner saying police should wander around bushes with wands. I've never heard anything so ludicrous. I mean, if you're going to use metal wands, which would be useful to you, you're not going to search the bushes. You're actually going to confront the people you need to and use the wands on them. This idea you wander around bushes. Can you see policemen attached to his belt with a metal?
Well, they've got enough to carry, and also you can't. You know, they're 99.9% of bushes aren't going to have a knife in them.
Yeah, but the thing is, Peter, no one likes stopping us. I know what it's like. I come from a perspective, I'm actually a black police officer, served in the Met, and I served in Durham, and I have been stopped and searched, and no one likes it. And people tell, yes, indiscriminately, a lot of black people do get stopped and searched, but what they don't tell you, and what people like the BBC and the Guardian won't tell you, disproportionately, we know this because the Office of National Statistics reduced the figures. Yes, disproportionately, black people are 5 times likely to be stopped and searched, but equally, and which they don't mention, black people are 5 times likely to be a victim of knife and gun crime. And I come from the perspective of Black Life Matters, all life matters, and people might not like stop and search, but it saves lives. And as a black man with teenage boys, yes, I might not like them getting stop and search, but I'd rather they stay alive and they end up.
And other people are being stopped and searched as well. Really interesting perspective, Colin. Thank you for it. That's Colin in Durham there. Just on the energy issue, Marco's been in touch. Said I pay £1 per day in standing charges, so even if I do not use any fuels, I'd be paying £30 a month anyway. Lots of perspectives on this. We're going to get some more on Hamas, on Putin, on Zelensky, and indeed on I think knife crime as well. We're going to take a load of calls right up to the top of 7 o'clock. We're also going to speak to Kevin O'Sullivan about what's coming up in his programme too between 7 and 10. So stay with us here on Talk.
People are listening to this who don't live in London, and they'll be thinking, oh, well, that's all very well for you. But at the very least, the cost of living is lower in other parts of the country that you don't feel like you can't feel TfL physically reaching into your wallet and taking your money out. And it might be TfL, but it might just be somebody doing that, because that's now a thing. Since when did that become a thing again?
My rental price has gone up. It's doubled in 4 years.
Unbelievable.
Doubled in 4 years.
Unbelievable.
And this is the thing. I know so many people moving out of London now, me included. I'm getting out.
Yeah.
I hate it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to P, who says net zero is the biggest, net zero, I think, is the biggest disaster to hit this country in 50 years, and any Prime Minister who implements it can only be seen as a traitor because it will destroy this country and its industries. Well, listen, it was brought in by Theresa May, was the Prime Minister, and then the Prime Minister after her was, of course, Boris Johnson, who agreed to it, then Liz Truss agreed to it, then Rishi Sunak agreed to it, now Keir Starmer has agreed to it. It has been the policy of the UK government cross-party. So, yeah, very happy to talk about it, and if you want to, there's a little bit of time left, and I'm here tomorrow and Friday between 4 and 7. Let's talk to Ian in London about knife crime. Ian, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good evening, Peter. I was listening to your discussion with a caller regarding the death penalty.
Yeah.
And you did say it's not a deterrent, but that's not correct. When it was abolished, the murder rate doubled. And when, like with the dog licence, when that was abolished, dog attacks doubled. The reason is we were hanging innocent people. That's why it was abolished, not because it wasn't a deterrent.
Do you think now we cannot put anyone who is there's even a question of their guilt to death? Because I do worry about that.
Well, I worry about that. Peter, I would have no I wouldn't lose a wink of sleep about hanging people burgled, animal cruelty, child cruelty, except I cannot trust the criminal justice system. Okay. John Malcolmson, 17 years, innocent. Colin Stagg tried to set him up for the murder of Rachel Nicole. Timothy Evans, Derek Bentley.
There are an awful lot of miscarriages of justice. There are an awful lot of miscarriages of justice, Ian. Yeah.
If I was a juror, I could not convict because I can't trust. I can't trust the lawyers.
And that again, I'm afraid, feeds into my argument, Ian, about the death penalty and how it's just not something that we should be doing. I just don't think a civilised country should do it, really, to be honest.
Well, there is an answer. I don't see why any knife can be bought online. I don't go to a shop. Go to a shop. You want a chisel, you want a screwdriver, you want a knife, you want to go to a shop. There's no excuse for them being sold online. That won't stop it all, but it'll make a difference, I believe.
Okay. Ian, thanks for your thoughts. Appreciate that. Let's talk to Marianne, who is in Bournemouth, about Zelensky. Hello, Marianne.
Hello. I heard you call her earlier, sort of making out that Putin's this big bad demon who wants to take over the whole of Europe and eventually the world. And it's just such propaganda that we've been fed. And
many people have consumed it for a long time.
They have, but I think, it's a bit like we've been told Trump, if Trump becomes president, the whole world's going to collapse. Well, it hasn't. He is president. And it's the same in this instance. Trump is right. Zelensky started the war by trying to join the UN, which he said he wouldn't. So indirectly, I believe that he did start it.
I don't think you can factually say that he started the war.
Not as in fighting, but antagonising when they were told, if you join, then we will go to war. So I think, if there was peace talks, it should have been done then.
Okay.
And instead, it's been a money-making machine for the war machine, People have made a lot of money from the war, including Ukraine.
Well, and there are suggestions that these peace talks are about the US and Russia making money.
Well, I think everyone's made out of it, and now it's got to the stage where it can't continue. It can't continue. Too many people have lost their lives.
Yeah. Well, and I think there are a lot of people. I think there are a lot of people, Marianne, who almost seem to not want it to end. I certainly want the war to end. I want there to be peace. I want there to be a just peace, as well. Let's talk to Alan about this. He's given me a ring from Salford. Alan, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good evening, Peter. Yes, I'm a bit perturbed with Mr. Trump with that latest statement, to be honest with you. But I think this guy moves in mysterious ways, and you can never get to the bottom of him. And he always comes up with the Trumps, as they say. But as for Russia and Mr. Putin and the Russian people, everybody keeps saying, we're not against the Russian people, it's against Putin. Let's go back in history. When Britain, France and America carved up Europe in 1947, just after the war.
Listen,
Communist government,
yeah.
Stalin killed more people than the Germans did.
Yep.
And they loved the regime when they took over the Baltic states and the European states, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and infiltrated them with, secret police. So let's not get this. It's a shame for the Russians. They like it because they get a benefit from it.
Well, take it back take it back to the present day, Alan. What do you think should happen? What should peace look like?
Well, I don't think he's going to get his territory back, but he should get the Black Sea.
Okay.
Is it Marastapol? What's it called? Got the name, but you know what I mean.
Okay.
But don't forget, he started this in 2014, really.
It dates back to then in your mind, yeah.
Yeah, and the old Europeans just sat on their hands, as usual. But really, he's a bad man, this fella.
Okay, Alan, thanks for your thoughts. Let's go to Mark in Lincolnshire. I think Mark wants to talk about the Middle East and Hamas. Mark, what are your thoughts on this?
Hi there, Peter.
Hi there.
Yeah, I think with Hamas, I mean, they obviously need pretty much eradicating from the face of the earth, Hamas. They're just absolutely dreadful people. As for the Gazans themselves, they can't come to the West. I think that's just an absolutely stupid... anybody that thinks that's even a remote possibility must be absolutely off their rocker, to be honest.
Shall I read you some of the names, Mark? Have you seen the letter? There's some of our finest parliamentarians are on there. Richard Bergen's on there, intellectual colossus. Jeremy Corbyn. I think John McDonnell's there as well. I'll see. I'm just looking through my papers to see if I can find it here. But yeah. Here we go. Diane Abbott, Shaukat Adam, Afsana Begum, Richard Bergen, as I said, Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah. It speaks volumes there, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, those names aren't that much of a surprise, are they, really?
Mark, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but I will talk to you on a future occasion, I promise, because we've got to find out now how you could be in with winning, with a chance of winning £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Kevin O'Sullivan's here on the other side of the news. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Peter.
What's coming up on your show?
We're going to kick off with the strange story of hate preacher Mohammed Hoblos, who for a week now we've been trying to get the Home Office to either confirm or
I've been in the office when you've been making those calls.
I mean, I've been doing it myself. That's not often that happens these days, dusting down my notebook and all that. And finally, we've got some kind of indication. His tour's supposed to start tonight in London. We've got some kind of indication that maybe he's been banned. I think he has been banned. Now, the point is, this guy is a serious hate